Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson at the State Water Survey, and you're here today for our Well Care 101 webinar through the private well class. We're at the University of Illinois, and the private well class program is sponsored by RCAP, the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, and through grant funding from US EPA to support well owners and those who work with well owners around the country. So today we're going to talk about some well basics and those sorts of things. So let's get started. For those of you who are EHPs and are looking for CE credit from NEHA, there is on the GoToWebinar handouts tab, 3 handouts for you there. Just want to remind everybody that the core part of this lesson today, or this webinar today, is the same material that we've delivered a number of times, in theory, to different well owners, or some of the same probably, but they're listed here on the bottom left. Those are the other dates. So if you participated in any of those webinars and you're still in the same credentialing cycle, NEHA has a 2-year credentialing cycle, then I used an example here. If your credentialing started at the beginning of this year, you wouldn't be able to take this class again after today until 2023. And so, and anyone who would like a certificate for participating in this webinar can also send an email, whether you're looking for NEHA credit or not. We are an LEHP credit provider for the state of Illinois, which is the state where we live and work in, and we can provide these other things if you're some other kind of provider that would like a certificate. And if you have any questions about that, Katie Buckley's with our program, who's on the call today too. She can answer any of those if you email us at info@privatewellclass.org. So this webinar is part of a national program I mentioned already through RCAP. RCAP also has staff all around the country that are doing boots on the ground work, working with well owners, putting on workshops in person before the pandemic, now online, but also doing well assessments and other things to help well owners understand how to take care of their wells better. And so we're the kind of the online portion of that program. And we developed a basic class, which this is not the private well class. This is a webinar that supports it. And I'll talk about that a little more later. This is being recorded. I know I had a number of emails this morning from folks who said they couldn't make it today. We record every webinar we do, and I'll talk about that at the very end and show you where you can access those. There will be time at the end for follow-up questions. We'll stay as long as you all want us to. And so we ask that you use the question or the chat box, whichever one you have on your GoToWebinar window, and ask questions there. Katie is going to monitor that during the webinar today, and she's making a list of those, and we'll just pull that up on the screen at the end. And the bottom bullet there is not true today. I actually am in my office because I was worried about internet connectivity at home. And so we don't have to worry about my daughter interrupting or a mower, although it's a dead of winter, or some of those issues. So hopefully it'll go smooth today. All right, a little bit about RCAP. RCAP is a network of 6 regional nonprofits. You may know them as in your state as Communities Unlimited or RCAC, or Southeast RCAP in the Southeast. All of these groups work together on this national program funded by EPA and have staff who are well experts who can help you with issues. They're always looking for groups to partner with, county health departments or watershed groups, you name it, extension, to put on workshops and provide resources for well owners, and they'd be glad to work with you. If you are interested in any of that, you can email us or email me, and I'll give you my email at the end. But it's a great program. This supports what they do, and they support us, and it allows us to really have a presence when a well owner has a real issue that can't be solved, without someone going out to a site or looking at a visit, having a visit. A lot of times RCAP staff have the capability to go out and be that person. So it's a really useful program that we've developed. So today we're really going to talk about the basics of well care and how to ensure your well safe. This is geared towards private well owners, but we realize we have a lot of environmental health professionals as well as others who are professionals that work with well owners. I'm a groundwater hydrologist at the State Water Survey. I've been here for over 30 years, working with well owners in Illinois. The Water Survey houses the state's well logs, and so we get requests for information or requests to help well owners in Illinois frequently, especially well owners who are new to being a well owner and that sort of thing. Katie Buckley is our water resources outreach specialist here at the survey. She provides support to our program and helps deliver our newsletter every month to our professional partners. And she'll be, as I mentioned, online answering questions. And I want to mention Walt Kelly, who's the head of our groundwater section. He's a geochemist. He helps every month answer some of the questions you all ask in advance. And what we do with those questions that you all asked is we answer those as the second half of this webinar. So there's about 30 or 40 minutes of presentation, and the rest is all answering your questions. And so I'll mention this a couple times today, but it's really valuable to go back and look at our webinars, even the past ones. Even if it's the same WellCare 101 for the first 40 minutes, the questions a lot of times are different. And if you have questions and want to kind of go through common questions that other folks have, it's a good place to find that information. Okay. So again, the water survey, we just ended our 125th anniversary, which we planned all these workshops around the state of Illinois, and we got to do none of them. Or actually, we did the first one in February in Champaign. But we were started because of health problems related to really cholera and typhoid outbreaks in the late 1890s. And this is well before chlorine became something that was common to community water supplies. And so it's grown from there. We're over 120 staff. We have groundwater, surface water, and atmospheric chemistry and atmospheric sciences departments and groups that do applied research and provide support under all those topics. So we do house the state's well logs. We also have a lab that well owners can use in Illinois that's subsidized by the state just for Illinois well owners. And so it's really a great place to work as far as being able to do applied research, as well as we're doing today, outreach and education. And this is an example I show because we are that old. In our files, we have records for all the communities in the state that both groundwater and surface water. But this is in our files for Pana, Illinois, from a typhoid outbreak in 1916. And what the water survey went down and investigated why this occurred. They had a water treatment plant they just built 2 years before, but they weren't using it because the mayor said it cost too much to run, and only half the town was sewered. And so our folks went down there expecting to find some issue with water treatment or wastewater treatment causing the problem. In the end, after they investigated the 32 cases, they found out it was the milk vat at the Pana Ice Cream Company. And so they had one vat, big giant tank of milk that 8 farmers brought milk into. Everyone who got milk from them used one bucket to get that milk out, and it got contaminated. And so it's just an example I like to show. And some of you that have been on some of these webinars are probably tired of this image, but it really talks about our history and what we've done in public health, as well as groundwater science and helping the public and others with health issues and water quality. So as a well owner, here's some of the basic take-home points. Private wells aren't regulated. It's really up to, once they're installed. So it's really up to the owner and the user to be sure your water's safe to drink. And so you are the operator of a very small water supply. Just like a community water supply has a licensed operator and people pay a fee, like I pay $40 to $50 a month, which actually is hardly ever happens anymore. It's more like $60 to $70 a month because I have a 9-year-old daughter. But that's spread out over all the residents in our community, and that pays for licensed operators, all the infrastructure, all the treatment that has to go in to make sure our water's safe. As a well owner, that's your responsibility. You need to make sure your water's safe for your family and anybody else that might drink it, that your infrastructure is solid and in place, your well's properly sealed, all those things if you're going to have a private well. And I know this well just because I grew up on a farm in central Illinois on an old hand-dug well my grandpa put in 1933. It was not protective. It had uncemented brick. When it rained, we had cloudy water. It was, and in all honesty, it was probably always contaminated with bacteria the whole time I was growing up, but you get used to those things And so it wasn't until my folks tried to sell our farmstead that they had a problem doing so because the well was contaminated. And what we find really, in all the work we do around the country working with well owners, is that most well problems and water quality problems come down to well construction. Old wells like the one I grew up on that's still in use today, that shouldn't be, and lack of knowledge for well owners who just don't know how to take care of their well. They don't sample. They don't realize they should sample in a lot of cases. But there's things you should do as a well owner to be a good steward of both your well and the aquifer you're using to protect it from contamination. And that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. So for as far as your well goes, generally deeper is better, but that's not always the case. And that goes from looking at really shallow wells, or wells that are hand dug wells that are, ours was only 14 foot deep, that are close to the surface, that are likely getting water from the surface, are less safe because they're more likely to get contamination from infiltration. But a deeper well that's properly sealed at the surface and has sound pipe, solid pipe with no gaps or anything down to depth is much safer because it's harder for surface contaminants to get into the well. And so generally it's better, but you can also run into things in deeper aquifers. We have naturally occurring arsenic, uranium, you name it. There's a lot of natural minerals or metals that can come up with a well water that there's nothing you can do about it. It's the source of the water has that in it. And that's just a natural thing. Arsenic's the 7th most common element in the Earth's crust. And so you're going to find it, and you do in a lot of places in the country, but not everywhere. Other things that matter are location on the landscape, especially for shallow wells. If you're in a rural subdivision where it's near, say, a small stream or river, and you're the farthest away from the river and your highest elevation, then likely all the shallow groundwater, whether your well's tapping that or not, is running towards the river. If all of those homes in that small subdivision all have septic, that means everyone's septic field is discharging, and all of that water is eventually making its way to the water table and heading towards the river. Now, Mother Nature takes care of a lot of that and cleans it up, which is why a septic system works so well. But if you're the next guy downstream, so to speak, you have more of a risk if you have a shallow well that something that one of your neighbors may do that's caused a problem, or they haven't managed their septic well and it's plugged, could be a problem. Groundwater flow direction, that's part of what we're talking about, but also knowing, a lot of times that's a more difficult thing to know. Groups like ours, the State Water Survey or your State Geological Survey, have information on the major aquifers in their states and what direction water is flowing. Like in Central Illinois, we have the Mahomet Aquifer. Where I'm at in East Central Illinois in Champaign County, the elevation of the waters is in the 700s or 600s. Where it discharges into the Illinois River, 120 miles away in Mason County, the elevation of the water is only 440. So the difference in waterhead, the elevation of the water, forces water to flow in a certain direction. And we've got a whole webinar about that, so I won't go into any more of it. But knowing which way the water is flowing helps you determine what's upgrading of you that might be a problem. Does my neighbor bury stuff all the time, with his front end loader? If you're on a farm, and that's the way I grew up, that did happen. And if you're upgrading or downgrading to that, then it could be causing a problem for your well. And just understanding the area around your well. Do you have any buried tanks? Is there livestock nearby or anything else that could, a gas station nearby or whatever? Knowing what's around you and then understanding how that could influence your well is really based on your well itself. You can have all of those things near your well. If it's a deep well and it's properly sealed and there's really no way for surface water to get down to the aquifer you're using, then it doesn't matter what's happening at the surface. But if you have a shallow well that's not protective and the casing's cracked and or it's just got a piece of plywood over it, which we do see, that might be more of a problem. So correcting poor well construction. So most states, there are a couple that don't, have well construction code that requires a well drilled today to meet a certain standard. Materials, licensed driller, all those things. But if you have an older well, like the one that I grew up on that's still being used, whenever the laws were added for construction code and those sorts of things, older existing wells were grandfathered in. So we still see wells in pits, which pits haven't been allowed for 40 years, at least not in Illinois. I don't believe they are anywhere. And also hand dug wells that may be, we run into wells that are well over 100 years old. And so those wells aren't built to any construction code, and they're more likely to not be properly sealed near the surface so that surface contaminants can get in. And if you have a well that's in a pit, it's not only an opportunity for, that can flood, and if your well's cap isn't properly sealed airtight, basically, water can seep in there, or it's a safety hazard. We see all kinds of problems where someone's driven over a piece of plywood in a yard, and it turns out it's the cover for their well pit, and the tractor gets a wheel stuck in it. So things like that. So here are some bad examples. And the first picture here is from the Washington State Department of Ecology. They're the agency in Washington State that licenses drillers and maintains the well construction code. And they have a blog. They had this on a number of years ago, but it's amazing how often this actually happens. This woman was walking across this piece of plywood in her little well house. It broke, she fell in, and it killed her. And you can see here, though, this well house, there's all kinds of insulation up around the edges. All that's covering it is an old piece of plywood that can shift and drop stuff into the well. If this is outside, which it likely is, that building probably has mice, everything else, which might be why the insulation's so frayed. And, there's just, it's a poor situation. And anything that drops into that well eventually could be coming out in your faucet or in your house. So in the picture on the upper left, this is a well that's actually not in use anymore, but it was. And Don Kellerman was down in Southern Illinois doing some research about his family, doing genealogy work, and I ran into him. I was down there to give a talk, and he had taken this picture, but it was nearby, and it's an old farmstead that's not being used anymore. But this was their well, and a goat had fallen in, and obviously it's been there quite a long time. But we see frogs in wells, dead rabbits, dead raccoons, all kinds of things can get in a well that's not properly sealed. And this well on the bottom, again, Walt Kelly is my boss and head of our section. We did a study of a bunch of dug and bored wells in a number of counties where they're prevalent because there's no real aquifer. And this well is in a cow pasture. That's why those posts are so raw, and all the footprints from the cows. So they use those as scratching posts, and they're doing their business right next to the well. And it's covered with some 2x10s and some pieces of tin roofing, and then some nice blocks or bricks or rocks to keep it down in the wind. Snakes, mice, a lot of things can get in this well. And it's just not a safe situation. And it's, right down gradient from a small field that probably in some years is in corn or soybeans and has pesticides and fertilizers and put on it. It's just, this is about the worst case for where you should put a well. And it's probably been there forever, and it's down away from the farmstead. You can see that in the background because there isn't any water. There's no real aquifer here, and they had to get closer to maybe a stream or a small ditch where there might have been some sand in the subsurface that they could use as basically a very small aquifer. And so it's just, these are bad situations, right? So what do you do with these wells? You bring them up to code if you can, and you have somebody inspect it and make sure it's safe at the surface and sealed. Inspect it or have somebody inspect it. If it's in a pit, bring it, put a pipe in, have a pipe installed to bring it up to the surface and use a pitless adapter. Fill that in with clay so that it's protective and water doesn't seep in. And talk to either a well authority, a contractor, your county, or local health district or health department to find out what they recommend. They may have certain rules in your jurisdiction that you need to follow for those things. In some cases, you may find out if you are having water quality problems that you might just want to put in a different well. And that's a big expense. It's not something to take lightly, but it's also the water you drink and use and your family is using every day. So along with that are abandoned wells. Wells that aren't being used anymore, like the one that had the goat in it, should be properly sealed. Because many of these requirements to file logs with the state or the county didn't occur until the 60s. And Illinois is 1968 before drillers were required to submit logs. Some states still don't require it. And some states like New York didn't pass that law until 2000. So there are many more wells that there are no documented existence for on file than there are wells that are actually on file, unfortunately. Like in New York, they suspect that they have about 120,000 well records, and they probably have close to 1 million wells, certainly over 800,000. And so, 7/8 of their wells aren't documented, and that's a lot of wells that no one knows where they're at for sure, or those sorts of things. And so those should be properly sealed, and it's called properly abandoned by filling them in with clay or clay grout. And so that there's no risk of somebody pouring, you see an old hole in the ground, some people just dump stuff in it. A good example of that is we sealed a well in the city of Macomb, Illinois. It was actually only 4 blocks from downtown, where they've had city water since 1916, but this home still had an old well in the backyard. A person bought the home, realized they had a well there, and they called, actually Western Illinois University's there, and they called the geology department and asked what they should do. We ended up getting involved with them to make that a demonstration to show how you should seal a well. When we finally opened up the concrete pad and looked down on the well, it was only 24 feet deep. There were probably 10,000 cigarette butts. And that's because the old hand pump that had been on there had rotted away a long time ago. So there was a 3-inch circular hole in the middle of the concrete lid, and the person who had lived there before went outside and smoked, and that's where he threw his cigarette butts. So you just never know what you're going to find. They should be sealed. We filled that well in. That's what everyone should do with their abandoned well. A lot of like stormwater conservation districts, or sometimes county or local health districts, will have programs where they'll cost share abandoning a well because it protects the aquifer as well as not being that safety hazard or a risk to you. And so it's something to consider. Here's just some examples. Again, these 2 pictures are both from the Washington State Department of Ecology, from their blog. In one case, they're trying to get a horse out of a well, and the other, a man fell. It's in his backyard. He fell through, and they fished him out, and he was completely fine, walked away from it, which is a miracle there. He fell 45 feet. There was just a case that made national news where a guy in, I think, Massachusetts was helping a friend, or might have been Connecticut, change something on the addition of his house, and he fell through the floor into an old well that they built an addition over it without sealing it, and the well dates to the 1860s. And so, there's all these issues. The third newspaper clipping here is Jessica McClure, if anybody remembers. That was covered live on CNN in the 90s when she was 18 months old. She was trapped in a well, and it took them over a day to get her out. They got her out. She was fine. She's a mother of 2 or 3 today. But it happens more than people realize. And these wells are, they're all over the place. And if you find one, you should seal it. That's the bottom line. And we can certainly help anyone that has a well like that find the information they need in their area to get that done. And it, likely will cost some money, but it's peace of mind. And if somebody else falls through that, you could be liable. There's a lot of risks to those things. So for basic well care, this is the drill rig. It's in operation, putting in a well at a home. And that's a finished well over on the right there from another drilling company in Vermont. They had a really nice picture on their website, and I asked them if I could use it. So there's a rubber seal between the top of that wellhead and the part that's fitted around the pipe, so that's sealed properly. And the thing that's on the back side of that, the reason it's not perfectly circular is the wiring comes up through there, and there's a vent tube with a screen. And so, really, if you're trying to do this stuff yourself, some people will try to do like drill a well, or you see it online. It's just not a good idea. And a lot of times you're doing things, you're shortcutting things to try to save money. But if you put in a sand point, for instance, in a really sandy area, I guarantee you anything that's put on the ground near your well, or even could be half a mile away, is eventually going to get in your well if it stays in the water, because there's no protection. And understanding that a sandy area where you have a shallow water table makes water really close to the surface and convenient for you doesn't mean it's safe to drink. So always consider using a licensed driller and installer when doing this kind of work, just because it's, having to replace your well is between, $8,000 and $30,000-$40,000 endeavor, depending on where you live in the country. And so it's not something to mess with. It's, more than a nice car in a lot of places. So, and that's not a purchase you make lightly. Most states, again, have handbooks and guides and rules on how you put in a well. 2 states do not, Alaska and Pennsylvania. And so if you're in those states, then you need to do more of your due diligence to make sure the driller you're using, in Pennsylvania, he may have a license, but it doesn't mean he's qualified. And I say that because I could get a Minnesota drilling license by sending in $70 and a certificate and some information. You don't have to take a test. You don't have to maintain CEUs, which continuing education units, which drillers have to do in most states to show that they know what they're doing. They're up with the latest technology and they know how to be safe and they understand the rules. And so there's a lot to all those things. And I know we get into one question about how to pick a driller. But this is a good place to mention that if you take the class, the 10-lesson class that we offer, which is also free, there's an entire section about how, what questions to ask, what things you should do that we don't have time to go into here, just to give you a nice overview to tell you that, it's important who you pick to drill your well. And I'll also mention that NGWA, the National Groundwater Association, does have a certificate program for drillers. It's voluntary. And so if they've got that certification, it means that they've went an extra step to try to show that they've got credentials and are qualified to drill and work on your well. So as far as the well site and the well itself, this is also a very nice well. It's actually in Canada, but I wanted to use it because it's such a good picture. The only thing wrong with this is it looks like there is another casing that's at the ground surface. The one thing wrong with this well is that the ground should be mounded up and higher at the wellhead, even just 4 or 5 inches, so that when it rains, water runs away from the well and doesn't run down along the sides of it. If it's properly grouted, then it shouldn't go very far, if at all. But in this case, it almost looks like this is a well within a well, because you can kind of see a casing on the bottom left. And that means that anything, when it rains or anything that runs off, or if this were in a low area where there might be surface runoff, like, you've seen places that flood or pond in yards and things like that, that would mean that water's running down the outside of the well casing. And so not only your casing should be elevated, but so should the ground around it a little bit. And that's a simple thing for anyone to fix. And the annulus is the area outside of the casing, but inside the hole that was drilled for the well. So the annulus may be 7 7/8 inches wide for a 5-inch well casing. And that's because you drill a larger hole so you can get the casing down in it in case it's not perfectly straight, or, the ground starts heaving in some places and can pinch things off. So then they fill that up with grout, which is made of clay and cement, so that water can't run through it. And as long as the well is properly sealed and grouted, it should be okay and not have those problems. But you see a lot of wells where they're older. There's no record of any kind of grout being used, just the well was installed. And so you have to just understand those things. There's also rules on setbacks. So, and I use Minnesota as an example because this is a really handy, pretty comprehensive list of things that they expect you to pay attention to if you're going to drill a well. And it just shows you all of the things that can influence your water quality and your well. Some of them are pretty obvious, a petroleum tank. Some aren't as obvious. A vertical heat exchanger. Well, is that using, some, especially when those were first started being put in, they weren't always using food grade for antifreeze, if they are in those and those sorts of things, they were using the kind that's harmful. There's just a lot of things to understand about your well. And this is the bottom half of that document. And every state has its own set of rules and setback distances. And even, it says 3 feet from a building. Well, we see wells that are sometimes in people's houses or their basements. And in one case here in Illinois, I ran into a guy who had cut off his well below land surface and put a new cap on it so he could put a garage over it. And this well actually had a submersible pump in it. So he didn't know enough about his well to understand that now if his pump fails, he just put a concrete pad in a garage over top of his well. So as soon as that happens, or there's another problem with the well, he's likely going to just have to drill another well because that's, that was really not a very good thing to do. So the 3 feet is really to give a drill rig, which you saw a picture of a drill rig a minute ago, a place to get backed up against and over top of that well, especially if you have a submersible pump when you need to have your pump pulled to be fixed if it fails. So as far as septic systems go, we do an entire webinar on septic systems, and I'll point that out later. But we get a quick overview of some things just to how they work and what you need to understand, just a few basics. So this is a 2-compartment tank. Not all of them are, but what the basics here is that everything from your house comes into this septic tank. The solids drop to the bottom. Some stuff will float on top, and there's bacteria from our bodies that are in there that start breaking all that material down. So this 2-compartment tank allows most of the solids to stay in the front half, and then the water flows on through as bacteria work on it and clean it up. Then just water can flow through out into your septic field, which is the perforated pipe shown here. And then it goes out through a gravel bed where there's also bacteria in the soil and develop in the gravel that break it down further and render really that harmless, and take care of all the the bad bacteria that are in there and things that can make you sick. And so this system works naturally great as long as you maintain it. Those solids will build up, and for people who try to tell me that they haven't pumped their tank in 20 years, my answer to them is just wait. Someday it's going to back up into your basement, or you're going to have a nice bright green wet patch near your septic tank because your septic field is clogged, and now you're going to have to dig it all out. You need to pump your tank regularly. You need to make sure there's not too many solids in it, and there's ways to do that. We described that in the other webinar, but it's good depending on the size of the tank and the number of people in the household. There's recommendations available on how often it should be pumped. A septic installer can also come out with a device and just measure the level of solids in your tank. If you have no idea and have never done it before, they can come out, have them come out once or twice, 1 year and then the next year, and see what the solids buildup has been, and then you get an idea of how soon, because you don't want that to fill all the way up and get to that outflow in the first part of that compartment. You want them to come in, and that's why this one shows 3 surface intakes, basically, or ways to get in the septic system. It's so you can pump it out, and that's what they come in and do. They pump out the solids, because some of that stuff can't be broken down readily, even if it sits there a long time. So things to do: maintain the area around your tank. You shouldn't drive over it. You shouldn't have trees. There's a lot of times where septic lines or your septic field gets clogged because of tree roots, or it gets compressed. If you put a concrete or asphalt road over your drain field, because it's how you're going to get out to some other part of your property, all that weight does when you drive heavy equipment over it, or even regular vehicles, is compress the dirt and compress everything above and below, and eventually won't let water flow through it anymore. And so you're shortening the life of your septic field. And so you don't want to do those things. And when I say reduce the flow into the water into your septic system, it doesn't mean you have to conserve water. It should work fine naturally, but you shouldn't have your sump pump go into it, your Whirlpool, or your softener. They just add too much, and softeners also add, it's more chemically driven, a lot of chloride that can be harmful to bacteria. I know there's a lot of debate out there about that, but it's just best to reduce the flow as much as you can. And so those things especially are a good idea not to, and some states won't allow it. They have laws that say you can't put a sump or a softener into your septic, out east anyway, some of the eastern states. Garbage disposals are a bad thing if you have a septic system, because all those pieces of carrot and all other vegetables and stuff, bacteria can't break those down at all. And they can start on the surface, but it's too solid, to be honest. And so if you have a garbage disposal, the conventional wisdom is you need to pump your tank twice as often as you would if you don't. And then it just should go without saying, don't put medicine down your toilet and flush it. Your kid had was sick and you had given him antibiotics, what do antibiotics do? They kill bacteria. So if you put it in your septic tank, you're going to kill the bacteria that are breaking down all the material in your septic tank. So it should go without saying that find a way to dispose of those. And certainly in the last 10 years, there's been a lot of progress with P3 and some of the other programs around the country to find places for people to take their pills and pharmaceuticals and so that they can be disposed of properly and not end up in our water supply. Again, inspect the tank to measure the solids and then pump it on a regular schedule. And you have to figure out what that is based on the size of your tank and the number of folks that live there. And again, if you don't know the size of your tank, which is a common problem, you bought a house that already has one, then I would measure the solids a few times to get an idea of how quickly it's filling up. I would have them, actually, if you haven't had it pumped in a long time, you should have someone come out and pump your tank, actually measure the solids, pump your tank, and then have them come out a year later and measure the solids. And you'd get an idea of how much buildup there was in a year. And from that, you can determine when you need to pump your tank. They recommend no more than, I think, 60 or 70% of the tank being filled before you pump it. Okay, I want to point out the EPA has a really great page. They have a program called Septic Smart. There's a lot of material here for homeowners and people who help homeowners. And it's just epa.gov/septic. And every year in September, there's a Septic Smart Week. We participate, we highlight it. We do a septic webinar every July. We talk more about some of this stuff. But there's a lot of good information, especially if you really have no idea of how your septic system works, how to take care of it, some of those things. And that's, a lot of people buy homes in the country or in a rural area where they've got a septic system, or buy a brand new home that's got a brand new septic system with no information about how to take care of it. This is a good place to find some resources. If you go on through this page, there's information for homeowners, how can it impact your water supply, all kinds of things. And then this diagram's a good one because it talks about drinking water. And even, the setback zone for putting your septic tank and your well a lot of times is 100 feet or more. But depending on the groundwater flow direction again, you can have an issue. So if I clicked on that link and went to the diagram, you can see here, because the groundwater flow direction in the well, and this might be 100 feet down, or it could be 20 feet down, because it's not to scale vertically. But if the drain field isn't doing its job and it makes it into the groundwater, actual groundwater, then your well is on the other side of the house and pulling water up, eventually you could have a problem. And so it's good to understand those things, know what the flow direction is. Ideally, if you had a new home built and the contractor could find out the flow direction, you would put the well on the left side and the drain field on the right side here. So that way water would be flowing away, depending on what's up gradient from the property you own, off to the left. If it's just forested ground or good, whatever, no risk of contaminants up gradient of you, then this would be an ideal thing to do. Also, a lot of stuff about new kinds of products. In some states now they require that septic meet standards like you would if you were a community water supply, your wastewater system. And so there's a lot of, or you're in an area that's maybe karst or it's vulnerable geology, so that there's no breakdown of material once it leaves your drain field. In those cases, they require basically you to have treatment for your wastewater before it gets put into the environment. And they have a lot of information here about some of those types of systems. I know out east in Massachusetts, the RCAP office out there, they talk a lot about some of these systems that remove nitrate, for instance, because there's just, it puts too much in the environment. And so it's regulated in some states, or local districts do that too. And there's a ton of webinars. Some of these are a few years older, but if you go to their webcast page, there's probably more than when I took the screenshot. There's just a lot of good information out there. And the MOU partnership is all the organizations that might influence decentralized wastewater. We're involved. We're not actually a partner because we're not kind of a national organization, but RCAP is, Rural Water, a lot of other organizations that work with either well owners or small communities to try to help keep our groundwater safe and also help keep our water quality safe. As far as testing, we recommend you test your well annually for nitrate and coliform, and anytime the well's been opened or if there's any noticeable change. So if you notice a change in taste, odor, or color, then that should raise a red flag, because groundwater should be pretty consistent in the taste, especially, and it shouldn't change. So what do you test for? It really matters on your situation, where the water's coming from. Like, we know if someone called us about the Mahomet Aquifer in Illinois, if they were in Champaign County, we'd say there's a slight risk of arsenic. But if they're in Tazewell County, we'd say, yeah, you need to test for arsenic. There's a lot more of it over there. And, so your state extension or geological survey or DNR, whatever agency like maps aquifers and does those sorts of things, may have information on if there are any known contaminants in your area and what aquifer. And then you can, if you know the information about your well, how deep it is and some of those things, then they can tell you if it's using that aquifer. Because there's a lot of different things that can be in the ground. They're not that common, and most of the time they're not an issue, or the driller already knows it's an issue going in. We have drillers call us about the Mahomet Aquifer over in Tazewell County. Is there a better place to drill or a worse place to drill as far as how deep into the aquifer? And unfortunately, there's not. But some are at least asking because they're trying to do what's best for their clients. But you ask your county, local, or state health department. They may be able to give you more information as well. And then anything that's been identified, maybe your neighbors know of something, or again, call Co-op Extension in your area. But again, sample for coliform and nitrate annually. And, by themselves, coliform and nitrate to a grown an adult aren't necessarily harmful. Nitrate can certainly be harmful to babies or pregnant women, and that's why it's regulated as a contaminant. But they're fairly ubiquitous in the environment, and because of all the things we use nitrate as fertilizer, and livestock waste and human waste has bacteria in it, coliform. Coliform itself isn't harmful, it's E. coli that's harmful. But if you have coliform or nitrate at elevated levels, it means it found its way into your well and it shouldn't have. And so that's why you test for it, because it indicates that there might be a problem with your well. So that's it's an easy, fairly inexpensive way to make sure that the integrity of your well is still there. And that's why we recommend that every year. There are also places, your state agency or maybe even locally may have some information that's beneficial to you. If you're in Massachusetts, for instance, the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, has this website where if you have a bedrock well, you can type in your address and they'll tell you if you're in an area where the bedrock's known to have arsenic or uranium. And that's pretty handy. If I'm moving from Illinois to Massachusetts and I choose to buy a home with a well, I'd probably look at this before I even considered buying a particular home. And that's one useful way, but if you're the owner and you had no idea until today that you could have uranium or arsenic in your well and you live in Massachusetts, you can go there and take a look, and it might help you determine that you need to take a water sample to find out. This is the state of Rhode Island. It's a very small state. It's about 30 by 40 miles in size. The small dots that are all over the place are where old orchards used to be. And some of them aren't old, some of them still exist, but many of them are gone. But until well into the 70s, arsenic was a primary ingredient in most pesticides used in orchards. And what they found in Rhode Island is that many of these locations have enough arsenic contamination in the soil that's made its way to the water table that, depending on the type of well you have, you may have arsenic contamination in just these isolated areas. Now, the big splotch in the middle is really why I show this slide. That's showing where there's elevated levels of beryllium. Now, until I found this, which 7 or 8 years ago, I found this on their website, I didn't realize beryllium was even a regulated contaminant, because you never hear about it. You never hear that, oh boy, there's beryllium contamination in this community or whatever. You just don't hear of that that often. But in this area, there's natural occurring beryllium at elevated levels. And if you look on the EPA's website at the primary health contaminants that are regulated for community water supplies, beryllium's listed because it does have health effects. And so if you're in Rhode Island and you lived in this area, I would recommend you sample for beryllium. And the only way you would know that is if you looked on the Rhode Island Department of Health's website and looked at the private well information, and you'd find this. And so you need to do your homework is the bottom line to understand what you should test for. A better example, and where some states are going, is Wisconsin through their DNR, which is the agency that regulates drillers and well construction. They've taken all the water quality samples they have from private wells, and they had Stevens Point, the Center for Watershed Science and Education at the University of Stevens Point, developed this ArcGIS mapping page where you can go in and dynamically change it. I put arsenic by county up in the upper right, and it's showing me the arsenic levels for all the wells they have samples for, and the average in each of those counties. Now, the counties that are clear means they had no samples, but in one county up by Lake Superior had no detections for the samples they have there, but everybody else has at least a little bit of arsenic. And the health standard is 10 for a community water supply. There aren't actually health standards for private wells, but everyone, me included, health departments, everybody else uses the community water supply standards as a guide to tell well owners what's safe and not safe. Because the EPA tells communities that's what's not safe above this level, and they won't allow it to be put in the community drinking water distribution system. So if I live near Green Bay, which is where the upper county of the three that are red, the average arsenic sample in those three counties is over 21, which is twice the health standard. And so if I'm going to move to the Green Bay area, or I live there, I'm going to sample for arsenic before I buy a home or decide what to do. There is treatment for arsenic, and so you can comfortably have a well that has arsenic in it and remove it, but it's a little more work for you, and costs a little more. You have maintenance of a treatment device and some of those things. You may not have a choice, and then you should add treatment in those cases for sure. So yeah, there's a lot of good information on this website for well owners in Wisconsin. So here's what we recommend. And again, we're looking at a national audience, so it's not going to have those specifics like beryllium or whatever. But we did include arsenic because there's enough of it around the country that it's worth just having as part of a test. A test annually for coliform and nitrate, and then we recommend doing initially, if you've never done one, a sample for all of these constituents. They're not all contaminants. But like if you have galvanized piping, you could have zinc or cadmium. If you do, that means the water's aggressive or corrosive, and it's leaching zinc and cadmium out of the galvanized pipes, which also have lead, which is why you need to sample for lead. But some of these things also help you just understand the general water chemistry or how aggressive or corrosive your water might be. Sulfate, pH, alkalinity, chloride, all play into how if your pipes, if they're copper or lead or have lead solder or galvanized, might be an issue. So we recommend you test for these things. Walt, again, my boss is a geochemist. He can look at that sample and tell you what's going on with it. And if you take a sample after your softener, a lot of these values, not a lot, but some of these values will definitely change. And like our lab can tell you if they get a sample that's, we ask people to collect a sample before their softener and after their softener. And if they provided two that are both after the softener, we know it because the chemistry is so much different when it goes through that process. So, again, talk to your local or county or state health department for advice on what to sample for as well for your area. So as far as getting it analyzed, every state accredits labs. It's a certified lab program that US EPA runs so that community water supplies, which have to test every 3 months in order to be able to provide water to their communities, have to use an accredited lab. And so we recommend you do the same. It means that they passed a more rigorous standard. They're using the methods that EPA approves to determine which constituents are in your water and how to analyze for those things, where another lab may not. You can also use a lab that's not certified, and it may be cheaper, but I would ask all of those questions first. Are you using EPA-approved methods? Do you follow EPA protocols? And I say that because there are some university labs that are no longer certified because it costs a lot of money to maintain your certification. And some that are doing it more as a service, like through extension, may not have been able to maintain that certification, but they're doing things all the right way. And that includes our lab. We're not certified at the moment, although they're working to become certified again. We were 15 years ago, but I believe Texas A&M, Virginia Tech, Penn State all have labs like that, they're doing good work and can provide accurate results, and it's worth considering figuring that out on your own and understanding that. So, and when you talk to a lab, we work with labs as well, and we tell, like the Association of Public Health Labs, I've been on several of their webinars, and I tell labs directly, I tell well owners, if a lab can't answer your questions, find another lab. And that's the truth, because you should. If a lab doesn't have someone who can give you the basics about your well or what you should sample for, I have people email me all the time. I call the lab and they told me I should have to tell them what I'm going to sample for, and I have no idea. Find a lab that does, because they should have those people on staff, and they should be able to, if they really have a business of trying to do private well samples, and there's some certified labs that won't do any private well samples. So you just got to do your own homework. Every state, again, accredits labs. So like in Illinois, if you went to the Illinois EPA's website and said, or just said Illinois EPA accredited labs, one of the hits in Google would be the page that shows you a list of all the labs that are certified to do analysis in Illinois. And you can find one close to you, or one that will do the delivered samples. They could be even in another state, but then you should contact them and do your due diligence. So, and again, they should provide everything you need, bottles, all that stuff. And if you get into specialty sampling, like you're in an area where there's fracking and you want a legally defensible sample, you need to talk to someone locally, because that's a whole nother ball game. If you want your sample to be a quote legally valid sample, probably, and I don't know this even for sure, but some states have their own rules on what that is, it's just a higher level of things that you need to look into on your own. As far as interpreting the results, sometimes lab reports can be really tricky. We actually worked with APHL again, and the lead was the Minnesota Department of Health on developing a toolkit for labs to try to help them understand why their lab reports may be confusing to well owners. And that's available to all the labs in the country. It's on Minnesota Department of Health's website. But if you are having any of those issues or don't understand your samples, sometimes they don't report things in the units that are used for that are on, like I tell you, it's 10 ppb parts per billion, which is 10 micrograms per liter of arsenic is considered the standard. You don't want to go over. Well, that's 0.01 milligrams per liter, And so if a lab reports everything in milligrams per liter, and it says 0.01 milligrams per liter on your result, or 0.015, that means you have 15 parts per billion, which is 50% more than the standard should be. And so, there's a lot to all that, and especially the units. And so if you do have a sample collected and you get a result and you're unsure in any way, take it to your local health department, ask them to go through it with you. That's one thing you can do. And again, if you find something in your well, sometimes, especially if it's really alarming, it might be best to first just resample. Labs can make mistakes too. We've run across that a few times. And if you've done a bacteria test, a coliform bacteria test, and it's positive, then you shouldn't drink the water. You need to, get an E. coli test done if you didn't have that done along with it, and make sure, because if you have E. coli, then it really could make someone sick. And then you should boil the water until you can, chlorinate it and disinfect your well. And there's a ton of questions, honestly, on every webinar about shot chlorination and disinfection, and we'll get to that in the questions. I do want to point out one site that's online that was developed by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services. It's called Be Well Informed. And if you go to this webpage, and down at the bottom left, it says enter your water test results. They developed this probably about 5 years ago, and it's really a step above any of the other programs that are out there that are online, because it does a number of things that are really helpful to you as a well owner. And even if you're not in New Hampshire, you can use this. They know we send people there all the time. And what I will say is, if you decide to use this with your sample results first, that's great, but I would still talk to a health professional at your local or county health department to get their advice, because when you're dealing with your health, you need to talk to someone who's qualified to talk about your health, not listen to a website. You can get guidance there, but then you need to move on and get some confirmation. So if you click on that, I went in and Up in the upper right, it says New Hampshire town or city. And if you click on that drop down, there's a whole list of all the towns, but it also has anonymous. And that's so if someone doesn't want to say, they don't have to. Why they've got that there, though, is so that they can gather information. It doesn't ask for your name or anything else, but they know from what town you're in, then they can understand where they need to direct their resources. Because if you happen to have a problem, or 20 people have a high nitrate problem in some small community, they need to go out and figure out why, right? And so it's a great tool, not only for the well owner, but also for them. The other nice thing is it's got a drop down for units. So I typed in 15, I'm telling it micrograms per liter. Most of the other ones either just say milligrams per liter, so you'd have to convert that yourself. And if you're not good at conversion, many of us aren't, then you may put in the wrong units and you may get a result that says it's really alarming when that's just not the case. And so I didn't fill anything else out on this, but I do want to point out that when you take the private well class, the 10 lessons, the first thing you're sent is a pretest. And the idea is you take the pretest, it's 11 questions, and you get a score. Then you go through the class, and then we send you the post test, which is basically the same test, and you get another score. We gather that information to show that taking the private well class actually helped you understand more about your well and answer those questions, and you've learned something. And we have one question on there that asks people to convert units. Only 27% of about 6,000 people have got it right. And so it is a tricky thing, and that's why I make such a, I've said so much about it, because a lot of people misinterpret their sampling results, and you need to really understand what that means. Anyway, when I put that in, it gives me this result. It's got a red X, says arsenic is 15, the standard 15 micrograms per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per liter, and the flag or the contaminant limit is 0.01. So it exceeds the community drinking water standard if you were in a community on a community water supply. But then it also tells you that there's these types of treatment available, which is really the next step, right? It's one thing to find out that you have something in your well, but now you've got to do something about it. We actually have well owners tell us all the time that they haven't sampled because they don't want to know. If they find out they've got something, then they've got to pay money to treat it. Well, that's a really backward way of looking at things when you could be causing a health problem for you or somebody in your family. You need to be proactive and aggressive about making sure what you're doing is safe. And so this site actually tells you there's two options: point of use absorptive media or reverse osmosis. And you see RO units that fit under a sink. A lot of people take their cooking and drinking water from that, and everything else you don't need it. Like for arsenic at 15, arsenic's not a dermal threat or an inhalation threat from water. It's only if you drink it. And if you take a shower in it or a bath in it, it's not a threat even at much higher rates, even over 150. And I wouldn't say that if I hadn't asked a health professional from the Minnesota Department of Health who said, yes, that's the facts. So you're really only worried about your drinking water in this case. But it tells you what you need to look for. So if you call a treatment professional, if they're trying to sell you anything else, they're not doing best by you, is the best way to put it. And unfortunately, that happens not only with drinking water treatment devices, but in every industry, right? You have people trying to sell you things you don't need. I've run into a number of homes where they've got $2,000 or $3,000 of treatment equipment either under their sink or in their basement, and their water was fine, but they were concerned, and so they basically bit and bought all this treatment that now they have to maintain. So you being an informed well owner is how you save money and make sure you're doing what you need to do to keep your family safe, not doing a lot of things that are unnecessary because of fear. All right, enough about that. If you go down the page, it tells you these things. I guess this is a good thing to mention, the last box about treatment options. So those two methods, or those two types of treatment, are called NSF ANSI Standard 53 and NSF ANSI Standard 58. RO is standard 58 and absorptive media is 53. What those standards are for the people that certify treatment devices. So, your light bulb has a UL symbol on it. That's Underwriters Lab. UL also evaluates treatment devices for homes. So there's really three of those three of those groups. They're called third-party certifiers. And you want to buy treatment equipment that's certified under one of these standards for the contaminant that you're trying to get rid of. So if you have arsenic, you want to use a device that's either certified for standard 53 or 58, because that means it's been tested and it reduces arsenic down below levels that are a health concern. And the different numbers, because they're different types of treatment, right? But the device should have that on it, and it's either going to have a UL symbol, an NSF symbol, which is the National Sanitation Foundation, or a gold seal from the Water Quality Association. And those are the three third-party certifiers, at least that I know of today, or that have been around a while. But you can find, you go to a website that sells treatment devices, you can find 100 that remove arsenic. And there's going to be a whole group of them that are, $50 or $100. And if you then get into the details, they don't have any kind of certification. And that means you're taking a risk that it might not work at all. It's buyer beware. But if you buy a device that may cost much more, filter, those are fairly reasonable if you put it on your kitchen tap. But if it's got a standard on it, then there's someone who's certifying that actually does what it's supposed to do. And if it doesn't, you can take it back. You can take samples and confirm. And I recommend that to anyone who adds treatment. Take a sample beforehand, add your treatment. After it's working and running, take another sample and make sure it's actually working properly. Because maybe you installed something wrong, or you put the filter in backwards, or if that's whatever it might be, you just need to confirm that you're actually doing what you think you're doing to protect your water. So always use certified equipment. So again, that tool is just a tool you can use as a guide, and they're for typical waters. Sometimes water is very odd. We've found an area where there's the pH of the water is almost 12, and you just don't find that in anywhere. It's really a strange situation. And so you should always take your sample results to your health department and ask them for a qualified answer if there's any risk there. And for those reasons, they're health professionals. They can tell you. I can tell you if it's above a limit or not, but I'm not a person to say, well, you shouldn't be drinking this or you should. Clearly, the arsenic rule is a good example. We have folks here in Illinois that live in Tazewell County that have drank water with high arsenic their whole life. And when I say to them, you probably shouldn't drink this, it's probably not safe based on these health standards, they're like, I've drank it my whole life. My grandpa lived to be 86, blah, blah, blah. Well, that's their choice. No one's going to tell you can't, but it's not, to me, the most prudent thing to avoid a common, simple way to avoid additional risk of cancer, for instance, in that case. And health departments can't tell you to stop drinking your water or condemn your well. They can only recommend it. And that's the advice we give, because that's true in 99% of the country. Now, in the last few years, there are a number of local health districts, a couple in Massachusetts, for instance, that have adopted their own rules. And if they sample a well and it's high in something, they actually may have the authority to condemn your well or make you add treatment. And in Rhode Island, they've passed a law that says when you sell a property, you have to get it tested. And if it tests high for something, you have to add treatment and mitigate that, or they can condemn the property as not being fit to live in. And so there's some things that are starting to change, like those. So if you're buying a property, make sure that you know all the rules, or if you're selling a property. But in most of the country, a health department can't tell you what to do with your sample result. And, the way around that, if you're concerned, because I have a lot of people tell me, I can't go to my county health department. They're going to tell me I can't drink my water. Well, no, they can't. And if you're concerned about that, call the health department and ask. If I share my water results with you that I had done myself at a private lab or wherever, can you condemn my well, or can you tell me I can't drink my water? And they're going to say, no, we can only give you advice and tell you why you shouldn't drink it. And then share it with them. They want to help you. They're out there to look out for your health. So that's the way to handle that. As far as treatment, I'm not going to say a lot about treatment. We have a lesson, our lesson 10, that covers what reverse osmosis and distillation and ion exchange and all those things are, how your softener works, all that stuff. And there's resources out there. Like I took these pictures from Arizona Cooperative Extension. They had a brochure they have available online. But the message really is, whatever kind of treatment you may have or you add, if it has a maintenance or replacement schedule, you have to be strict about following it and sticking with it. Because if you don't change out the filter or replace, the things in your RO unit that you need to replace, then eventually it's going to stop working and a filter can get clogged. And when it gets clogged, it becomes a source of bacteria or other contamination, or there's breakthrough and it's not doing anything that it's supposed to do. One of the folks at Minnesota Department of Health that works in the field with well owners, he suggested when we started this program that we don't include anything about treatment and don't recommend it to people. And he said, I've seen more treatment devices that become the source of contamination than treatment devices that actually do what they're supposed to do. And that's on you as a well owner. If you're not going to take care and manage your system, then none of the things we tell you are going to matter, because you've got to take care of it and be a good steward. And that's really the take-home message related to treatment. So that's what I had for at least that part of our class. I want to talk about our program and our class that's online. This is our front page. You click on the button in the middle that says take our free class, or down on the left where it says learn by email. It takes you to a page to sign up for our class. It's 10 lessons. They arrive by email. They're actually a PDF. You get one a week. And for every person that emails me and says one a week's not often enough, I want them every day, or I want them all at once, we have another person who says once a week's too much. I don't have that much time. By the time I read the 6 to 10 pages you send me, I can't get through it. So we've stuck on 7 days and we've stayed there. So it's like a marketing campaign in a way. If you sign up right now with your first name and we ask the state you live in, just so we can tell EPA that yes, we're reaching people all over the country, that's all it's used for, we'll send it to your email address and you'll get one a week at the same time every week. Once you're in the system, it sets that up and you'll get the 10 lessons. You'll get a pretest along with lesson 1 right away, and then one a week from that point on. They're yours. We ask that you not put them online or anything like that, but we need people to take our class online so we can stay funded to do this work. But if you ever have questions, or you have folks, we've run into a number of folks that don't use the internet or don't have computers. These are generally elderly couples or elderly folks that live out in the country. They just never got into computers and don't use them. We gladly will print the whole thing off and mail it to them so they can have a copy. And just let us know if you run into that situation. And we've done that a number of times. And glad to do it. So obviously, if you're on this call today, you have access, and so you can sign up. But that's all there is to it, and it's a lot more detailed and provides a lot more information than we covered in the last hour here. For every lesson, there's also a set of resources that go along with it, and these are all publicly available from reputable sources that we've vetted. So, Minnesota Department of Health, Cornell University, but they explain what we've tried to explain in our lesson 1, the science of groundwater. It explains some of those things in more detail and maybe in a different way. I wrote our lessons. I wrote them like I'm talking to someone. That's the way I write. Some people that doesn't resonate with. And if it's not clear or terms aren't clear, you can go to these resources to learn more. And or there's an additional things. So like for lesson 2, we put the resource up here, the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook, because it has everything related to flowing wells you'd ever want to know. It's really awesome. And that's because Michigan was losing 28 million gallons a day of groundwater to flowing wells. And so they passed a rule that requires those to be capped. So it's got a lot of information about that in it, how you cap a well so that still be used, and it's under pressure. Because that's why water flows. It's like squeezing a juice box. If I squeeze a juice box with a straw in it, water comes out the straw. Well, that's what's happening here. There's pressure somewhere else at a higher elevation that's causing water to want to come up in that well above the top of the well. And that's why you have a flowing well. So anyway, there's a lot of good resources there, and those are available to you, whether you take the class or not. They're on our website. They do follow the lessons, and there's 10 of those. We also put on webinars like the one we're doing today. It's recorded. I've had probably 15 people email me this morning saying, I can't make the webinar today. Will it be recorded? Every one is recorded. There's 75 of them, if you look here, as of May of this last year, and they're on different topics. We do some of them more often than not, like we did Well Care 101 in June the last time, so every 6 months or so. So you can go back through. If you go back to that one, you'll see different questions at the end that we're going to get to in a minute. But we also have, just on groundwater and well construction, the different types of wells. Do you know the difference between a bedrock well, a sand and gravel well, and a dug or bored well, a large diameter well? It explains all that information so you understand what type of well you have and what the issues are with that and that sort of thing. We do we've done this webinar twice. We did it in October on funding and financing options for well owners. This is a big issue because people, in all honesty, me included, everyone takes their water for granted. It comes out of your tap, it's there, it works. The idea of paying $20,000 to put in a new well just doesn't sit with people, anyone, right? You don't want to spend that kind of money just to have water when you feel like I should already have water. Well, that's not the case. Even communities, you pay every month for the water, and that's where the money goes, is for all those things that make sure that you have pressure at your tap and all those things I mentioned earlier. But especially for low-income folks, there are some options. The USDA has a really good program. We brought USDA in. They participated in this webinar. We also went through like cost shares and different programs. If you live in Iowa, they have a grants to counties program. So you can talk to your county health department and they may cost share the cost of your sample analysis. There's septic programs in certain areas where there's sensitive geology and they're worried about contamination of aquifers. There's all those things, and we talk about it in this webinar. We've done this webinar twice. We did it in 2016 and again in 2018 on lead. It's such a big issue these days, and there's all the work that's going on now to try to remove lead pipes from water supplies. If you have lead pipes in your home, and if you're on a well and it's an older home, you likely do, then this webinar is certainly worth watching. We brought in Kelsey Piper, Dr. Kelsey Piper, who's now at Northeastern, but was at Virginia Tech, who's done a lot of research on lead and lead pipes. The aquifer in Virginia is a very low pH, like 5.5, and so they have a lot of lead problems in older homes because of that, because the water's aggressive and corrosive and leaches. And so, yeah, there's a lot of good information on what you need to understand about the age of your home, all those sorts of things. And then I mentioned before, we do one every July on septic systems, and we also bring in an expert for that, certainly to help answer the questions that we get. He was a licensed EHP in Massachusetts for 8 years before he joined RCAP in the Northeast RCAP. He's inspected hundreds, many hundreds of septic systems and really understands how they work and what the problems people have. And he's a great resource, and he helps us out every July. Yeah, so they're really worth watching. We also have 16 of these training videos. So there might be more than that now. This is an older slide. We put them all up, most of them up in January of 16. So they're 4 full years here, 5 full years, excuse me. But like this video is one of the most popular ones. It's because a lot of people have pressure problems. And so we have one, why does my well keep losing pressure, or how does my pressure tank work? One of these has had over 400,000 views. And, it's 4 to 6 minutes long. It's just a quick topical webinar or video about the basics of how that works and how the relationship of your pressure tank and your pressure switch to your well and your pump. And so there's a, how does a well work? What's the difference? What's a sand and gravel aquifer? What's a bedrock aquifer? What do I do during a drought? What do I do during a fire? All those sorts of things we tried to cover in these short videos just to give you some insight about what you need to consider if you're in one of those situations. So the bottom line is, this is the take home, I guess, if you will. You need to understand your well log, and I haven't talked much about that today, but if you don't have your well log, you should see if you can get it from the driller who drilled your well, or find out who the driller is and see if they have it, or your state or local agency that drillers are required to report logs to. And again, that will help you in Pennsylvania or Alaska. I know Alaska is really trying to get that changed. And in Pennsylvania, it hasn't passed because their state legislature won't do it. A lot of people want it, and that's unfortunate, but that's politics. And so it's on you, if you will. But well owners in Illinois can call us, and if we have your log, we'll give you a copy. Or who's drilled the well even. Sometimes there's no geology or information about the pump, but then it gives you a starting point. But if you understand how deep your well is, if it has a screen, which is for a sand and gravel well generally, and how deep it is, then you know a lot more information, and how much pipe is in the ground. You can have a bedrock well that's 600 feet deep that only has 20 or 30 feet of actual pipe, and that's much less productive than a 200-foot well that's in sand and gravel that has pipe all the way down to the screen at the bottom to 195 feet. So, and again, that's covered in the other webinar in more detail. So you should understand if there are any naturally occurring contaminants, what other issues you might have, and you can find that out by talking to, well professionals, health professionals, extension, any of the resource folks in your area, or call your state agency that regulates well drillers, or your state geological survey, or in Illinois, the state water survey. And hopefully what you get out of taking our class is you learn better questions to ask and the right questions to ask so that you can use the local sources of information that are available to you. If you ask a specific question about your well in Georgia, I'm probably not going to be able to answer it without having to call someone in Georgia to find out more information. What kind of aquifer is it? All those sorts of things. But if you take the class and you've learned enough that now you're comfortable with calling the agency in Georgia that might be able to get those answers for you, now you're much more empowered to take care of your well, and you're not relying on anybody else, which is the way it really should be. You should be in control of your well and the situation, and the way you do that is by learning more about it and by taking samples to ensure your well is still safe and the water safe to drink. Yeah, so here's our goal. Help well owners understand why your well is important, why you should understand how it works, and how you can help protect yourself from risk, and that's it. And I should have changed this slide because many of the 40+ questions you all asked when you registered are answered in the class lessons. And that number this time should be, I believe, close to 200 questions. There were over 600 people registered for today. It looks like we have 253 who actually attended, and that's pretty typical because a lot of folks register right whenever the news comes out, and then they're busy today, and I get that. And they know they can watch the video. But we had a ton of questions, which of course we can't answer 200 questions today either. But if you go through the class lessons, a lot of your questions would be answered. And so we're going to go through the questions now. I see we do have a number of questions that people have asked today, and we'll get to those at the end. What I tried to do is answer some of the questions that were the most common asked today, like disinfection was probably asked by 20 people. And so enough people are asking it, we're going to put it up there, even though we talk about it almost every month. And that's okay, because you need to understand it. It's important. It's an important issue for everyone. And again, Katie's taking questions that are in the chat or question box, and she's making a list on a Google Doc that we're sharing on another screen, and I'll bring that over at the end and we can go through those. And I'll just tell you up front, if I don't know the answer to your question, I'm not going to try to answer it. I'm going to ask you to email us at info@privatewellclass.org so I can find someone to give a qualified answer. I lean on a lot of folks for help. Especially like with corrosion issues. Luckily, through the work we've done, we've met some really smart people, like at US EPA, who work in their research lab that are corrosion experts. And so I just had a problem a few days ago where one of the RCAP folks emailed me about a problem that I had no idea how to answer, or not a good answer. I know just enough to be dangerous. So I emailed this colleague at US EPA, and he explained exactly what we needed to tell the well owner. So don't be afraid to ask us. You might take a while to get an answer, but if we can't answer it, we will find someone who can. So I want to talk about bacteria. That's kind of the big issue in a lot of things. So how do coliform bacteria, how does it get into a sealed well? Well, it usually gets in because it's not a sealed well. You just might think it is. And a good example of that is we were working with a well owner in Virginia who said, there's nothing around my well. I've shot chlorinated it twice, and it keeps coming back with bacteria, and I don't understand why. So I said, send me a picture. And actually, we were working with the RCAP folks in Virginia on this, and so they sent us a picture. It turned out there was a 18-inch diameter tree within 3 feet of the well. And it's a PVC cased well, which isn't as sturdy as steel. So if you take a tree root that's growing and it starts wrapping around that well, eventually, as the root grows, it's going to start squeezing it and crack the casing. And this was a big tree. 18 inches is, 25, 30-year-old tree in most cases. And so I said, it's likely that there's tree roots that have got around that casing and cracked it. And it's, your options are to take out the tree and redo the upper probably 10 or 15 feet of that well, or put a new well in somewhere else. And sure enough, I said the way to find out is to camera the well. There's cameras today that you can drop down in a well and it'll show you what's going on. They're really a wonderful tool. And sure enough, that was the problem. So you really need to understand that there's a lot, even if your well looks properly sealed to the surface, there could be things going on, and that's just a good example. So understand your well construction, where your water's coming from, local geology, all those things. So if you have a shallow well, an old dug well or a sand point, then if you have sources nearby, they're likely getting into that water table, which is the the original, the uppermost layer that's saturated. You can have lower aquifers that are separated from the water table, and your water may not be coming from the water table. And if that's the case, that's a good thing. And it means that there's probably a layer of geology that's separating the water table aquifer from the deeper aquifers where your water's coming from. And so you probably wouldn't have any of these problems. So it's typically shallow wells that are either put in like a sand point. You do it yourself because you can go to Rural King or Farm and Fleet and buy a kit and put it in, for $300, where a new well is going to cost you thousands. You get what you pay for. They have no grout. They're very shallow, a lot of times less than 20 feet. So if anything nearby, or there's any applications of fertilizers or pesticides nearby, or you're near a stream, a lot of times that's the culprit. Water's going to get from the stream into your well in that case. So the other thing is vulnerable geology. Sometimes you have highly permeable soils, which are sands at the surface, where a lot of people put in sand points. But you can also have karst, which there's sinkholes, there's caves, southern Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, Tennessee, where Mammoth Cave is. All that's karst topography. We have a number of areas in Illinois like that, and they're just not protective. Pike County, Illinois, their health department, 80% of the samples they get in are positive for coliform and E. coli. And so the only way around that is to treat. And if you're in that situation, you can't get, it's the aquifer that's contaminated naturally, and it always will be. And so the only thing you can do is intercept that contaminant through treatment before you're drinking it. And then not properly sealed the surface. I mentioned the tree root example already. Nebraska did a grout study working with Barsol that makes grout for drillers all over the country, and they use clear PVC or clear plastic pipe for the casing, and then use cameras to monitor what happened to grout after they started filling in the annulus with grout. And in some geologies, the grout didn't stay in the borehole. It went out into the formation of in the geology, meaning that the grout seal that's supposed to be there and is required by law in that state isn't actually effective at protecting surface contamination from running down along the casing. And so, there's things that could be going on that wouldn't be your first thought. Like, you wouldn't expect a properly grouted well that's been signed off on by the state is properly installed to be a problem, but if all else fails, it could be. We run into wells that have no cap. I showed you examples like the well with the piece of plywood or the pieces of tin and wood, but we see wells that have no cap at all that are just small diameter wells as well, 5-inch wells, or have a Folgers can on top of them, or whatever. And all those things that I listed there can get in a well. Well disinfection. So there's always a lot of questions, 3 or 4 specifically about shocking. It doesn't have to be, if you end up needing continuous well treatment, it doesn't need to be chlorine. It can be an UV disinfection, or now there's units that are being developed that use hydrogen peroxide. Those are all oxidants, and they all disinfect water and kill bacteria. So the big problem, though, is that people think, and a lot of even drillers will tell people, just throw some pellets down the well, or just throw a cup of bleach down the well every month. That's terrible advice. And number of states, and I'll talk about pellets at the before I turn the slide, but a number of states don't allow you to use pellets in your well anymore. If you have one of those feeders that sits on the top of the well, because they're just not effective at what you at doing what they're supposed to do. You should only disinfect your well when you've sampled or you have evidence that there's bacteria. And I say the evidence part because if you have iron bacteria in your well, it's not harmful, but it builds up in layers and can sometimes cause a smell. Some of the sulfur smell could be caused by iron bacteria. And they develop in these thick layers that you can't just get rid of by shock chlorinating most of the time. But if you're pouring bleach down your well, especially if you just put a cup of bleach that's 5% bleach like Clorox, it's an oxidant. It leaches metals. So when it hits your well components, if they're made of brass or you've got galvanized pipe as it goes down, it's going to leach lead out of those pipes because it's that strong. And so we use, I've literally looked at probably 70 different documents that are how to disinfect your well using shock chlorination. And the one that we chose to use to share with well owners is the one from Minnesota Department of Health that I show the top of here. Now, if you go to their webpage, they've changed this document since we first found it and you started using it. They tried to streamline it and took out some of the most important things, in my opinion, to make it clear to a well owner what they need to do. Some of the pictures, some of the tables, they're trying to make it, because it's almost 10 pages long. But my argument is we need to give you the best advice. And so we had a copy of this already saved, and this is what we provide through our website, is their old version. And I actually had one of their health people tell me that they prefer the old version as well. It wasn't their decision to change this. And so you can go find it on their webpage. It's a shortened version. I think it's 4 pages, but you should use the one. I showed class resources a while ago with lesson 1 and lesson 2. Well, if you go down to lesson 10, you'll see one that shows this well and water system disinfection for private wells. You click on that link, it's going to give you the version that we've saved and been using. That's publicly available information. And that's because it tells you to mix your chlorine. You mix it, around 200 milligrams per liter, I think, or yeah. But it tells you in there how to measure the size of your well and understand with the depth how much you should put in, all those things. Throwing a cup of bleach down your well does nothing to kill everything if there's a lot of water, and if there's a lot of, if there's a lot of water, because it dilutes it so much, it's not at a concentration that's actually going to kill anything. And so you need to shock chlorinate it when you need to. And if you have a problem like iron bacteria that you can't get rid of, you may need to add continuous treatment, and that could be could be chlorine, but it's a chlorine that's put in solution as a treatment device in your home, not using pellets. Those things you can't, just throwing pellets down your well or putting one down every, having it drop one every morning or whatever it does, again, isn't the right concentration, and it doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do. So we recommend you follow those guidelines. And this is just one of the pages. It tells you, depending on how big the diameter of the well is, how much to use. You mix it up in a bucket so you're not putting too much. Then you recirculate it, and then you circulate it in your home. You have to get in everything in your house. It even has information about treatment, and you need to look, and it mentions the Water Quality Association, WQA.org here, because some things you don't have to take offline, some things you do. And so it tells you if you're going to put chlorinated water through your system, here's how you can protect that. And so a little bit more about all that, especially when retesting shows that you still have bacteria in your well. Well, I mentioned it could be buildup of layers, and sometimes that's iron bacteria, but it can harbor coliform bacteria or E. coli with it. And so you might just be killing the upper layer. The advice we used to give, and still consider to be good advice, is you might need to do that 2 or 3 times to actually kill everything. And so if that happens to you, it's a pain, right? To have to not use your water for a day or overnight because you're letting the chlorine sit in all your pipes. But in the end, it's how you make sure your complete plumbing system and your well are chlorinated and there's no bacteria. The other problem is it could be a continuous source. So it turns out, like the picture we showed of the diagram from EPA's septic page, it could be that water from your septic system is going underneath and coming towards your well because of groundwater flow, or maybe there's a thin sand lens that it's getting to, and that's what your well's using for a water supply. Or you're close to a feedlot, and some of that is getting in your well. We've run into, especially older wells, that are right in the middle of a feedlot, and I'm not talking about a pasture with grass. I'm talking about a feedlot with a foot of mud because there's so many cows on top of each other in there that it's always being trampled down. And so in those cases, you either have to find a new place for a well and put in another well, or you're going to need to add continuous disinfection. So, and the last thing I want to mention is the chemistry of your water matters. So, we talk about low pH being aggressive or corrosive water, but you can also have water that's high pH. Most of the water in Illinois is over 7.5, and that by itself isn't a problem. But we know that when the pH of the water, the natural groundwater, is above 8, chlorine just doesn't become effective. It exists in a different form, and I don't know all the details there. I can get you to someone who does, but Virginia Tech's working on that, or Kelsey is actually now at Northeastern on what kind of guidance we can give well owners. And one is, pH strips are pretty accurate these days because of pools and, aquariums and all that stuff. So you can find out what the pH of your water is, and pretty accurately by yourself. And that's, we don't recommend a lot of treatment kits and stuff because they're just not that accurate. But for pH, you can probably learn that information. And so you can do something on your own to determine if you should even be using chlorine, because if your pH is above 8, then chlorine's not going to be helpful. You need to find another way to disinfect your well. And that's, that doesn't happen very often. So it'd be a pretty unusual event if it did. So there could be other things, and some water may have other constituents in it that also react with chlorine. And if they do, the standard dose, if you will, that was recommended by the Minnesota Department of Health may not be enough. That's what the bottom line is. And so, if it doesn't work, one thing to do is to try it with a little higher concentration. Certainly don't go up to 5 milligrams per liter like straight bleach is, but maybe double it to 300 or 400 milligrams per liter and try it. No matter what you do, if you shock chlorinate your well, when you start running all your water lines in your house, when you follow all the guidelines, at the end, the last thing you do before you go to bed is you turn on all the lines in your house, flush all the toilets, turn on all the showers, and turn them off as soon as you smell chlorine. You may run into a case where you don't smell chlorine at all, and that means there wasn't enough chlorine there to do the job. And so you need to add a higher concentration for whatever reason that might be. Someone asked about septic additives. I normally wouldn't include that in this one because we do a septic webinar, but I was actually emailing with a gentleman this morning who asked that question. And so this is, we put this blog post out in 2016. We asked, the first time we did a septic webinar, I said, no, they don't really do anything if you're managing your septic system correctly. I probably got 20 hate emails from people saying that they've used additives and they never had to pump their septic tank. They don't do anything extra. There's natural bacteria in your bodies that are the bacteria in your septic system that break things down. And so as long as you're not adding stuff you're not supposed to, like antibiotics or, and running too much water through your system so the bacteria don't have a chance to actually do their work, they're a natural system that works great. So the short answer is no, and you can read the blog post if you want to learn more. And you could go to our page and find all our blog posts, and it's at the very end because it's one of the early ones. And there's also, Small Flows was a newsletter that went out through the National Environmental Services Center at West Virginia. I don't believe they put this out anymore, but there's a lot of good materials on their website. And they had actually done some research looking at these additives, and there's no proof that they do anything more than natural bacteria that are in the system anyway. And so some people spend a lot of money on those additives, and they're not necessarily going to do anything more for your septic system. So yeah, that's my answer to that question. High iron. My well has iron in it. So first thing there, it tastes terrible. So it's not staining. It's staining your clothes, but it's not necessarily causing the terrible taste. But I mean, most groundwater has iron in it. I mean, all of the groundwater in Illinois has fairly high iron. Almost everyone needs some kind of treatment if they don't want staining of their fixtures and their bathtub and those sorts of things. So what our lab recommends is, because it's not really a health concern, right? Iron isn't a health concern at levels you'd find in groundwater at all. And but it's a nuisance, certainly. And so when it comes up into your well, the turbulence of your pump and all those things, some of it's turned into iron oxide, which is the red stuff. When it hits air, it reacts and forms the iron oxide that ends up on your in your sink. So if you start with a sediment filter, like a 5-micron cloth filter, it'll take any of that oxidized iron out before it ever gets into your treatment devices, which is, if you have treatment as well, it's a good idea because that will end up clogging those things up quicker too. And then use some kind of treatment. They even make iron filters that do treat, and it's an oxidizing filter. So it oxidizes more of the iron as it's going through and captures more of it that way. But your softener also removes iron, even though it's not necessarily why you have a softener. And they make special kinds of water softeners that are meant for removing more iron as well, I believe. So if you Google iron in drinking water, Illinois Department of Public Health has a link there that would be a good one to look at. And again, regarding the taste question of that, it's not likely the iron, but it could just be the general water. One thing you could do as a more simple solution is just to add a filter that's rated for taste and odor. And again, that's rated means that it's been through some kind of testing to prove it does that. And a lot of times, like I know a friend of mine that has arsenic, they put on a filter on their tap, their kitchen tap, made by DuPont, that was rated for arsenic. But when you read the information on that filter, it's also rated for taste and odor and a number of other things. So it's it does more good than just removing arsenic. And you can find something like that. And I'm paraphrasing this because it was a really long question because the guy had to explain to me their situation. But the bottom line is they share a well with another family. The well is 200 feet from his home, but it wasn't clear to me. I believe the water goes into the other house first, and they have their pressure set at 2040, which if you don't know what that means the shutoff pressure is 40, the turn-on pressure is 20. So when you put water in your pressure tank, the pump kicks on and fills that pressure tank up until it reaches 40 psi, and then it shuts off. And then as you turn on the faucets in your house and start running water, the pressure in the pressure tank slowly goes down as water goes out of that tank. When it gets down to 20, then the pump kicks back on because that's pretty low pressure. That's a low setting to start with, and I wanted to mention that. And he said the water coming to his house, and I'm not sure how far apart the houses are, is 28 psi. That's pretty low. But the other issue is they have air in their line. So when they turn on a faucet, they get sputtering of water. And what do they do about that? Well, there's really two things that could be. And let's talk about the pressure first. If your neighbor is the one who has the pressure setting, ask him to change it. And as long as the pressure tank's rated for 40 to 60, I would move it up because it's, we see this all the time. Problems with people who share wells, pressure problems, or when a pump fails and everyone's got to pony up money for a new pump. It's not a good idea overall to have a shared well. But also, depending on how far away you are, water pressure decreases through a pipe. If you're pushing it at 40 at your neighbor's house, it's 28's a pretty reasonable number depending on the distance at your house, because the friction in the pipe causes a loss of pressure as you move through it. That's just engineering. And so, we've run across places where there's no water at a home, there's no aquifer, but a quarter mile away, and this was a farmhouse, a quarter mile away there was aquifer. So the farmer put in a well a quarter mile from his house and ran a line all the way to his house. That's a lot of pipe and a lot of friction. And so he had, instead of having, a 5 gallon per minute pump that, pushed water at, whatever PSI, he had a 25 gallon per minute pump just to push the water that much harder and get it to his home with enough pressure to actually be usable and fill up his pressure tank. So that's the solution to that, is really just increasing the pressure. It might not solve your problem at all with the air. It likely won't. To me, there's probably two things that could be going on. We see, so the drop pipe is a pipe that goes from your pump up to the surface to push the water into your home and into your pressure tank. And so if it gets a hole in it, then it's spurting water out when the pump is on. But when your pump kicks off, it acts as a drain. And the water in your drop pipe below, if you have a shutoff, will drain out of your drop pipe to that hole in the pipe. Then as soon as your pump kicks on, you've got that column of air between the hole and the surface that you're pushing through into your system. And so if that's happening, that's where you're getting your air. The only other thing that we've seen, or I've seen, is when you have methane. So we have an aquifer here that's got an organic layer where a glacier came and buried trees and everything else. And so that all became, now it's like coal-like and it's organic material. Well, it generates a lot of methane. Well, the weight of the ground keeps that methane in solution in the water, and because it's under so much pressure. But as soon as you pop a well into that aquifer and start pulling water out, all the pressure comes off. The water coming out of your faucet is at 1 psi. That's the pressure of the air. And so a lot of times that allows the methane to come out of solution. And we see wells, there's a place in Illinois where there's a lot of this occurring, where we see wells that have a continual flame. They've got a pressure relief on the top of the well cap, and they just have it lit. And it's methane coming out of the well bore, because in the well, if the water's not up all the way at the top, it's at atmospheric pressure, it's releasing methane from the water in the well. And so that's the other likely solution. And we did a pump test, trying to pump a well at 600 gallons a minute for a community in an area like this. And we actually had to turn the pump on and then close the valve so that the pump is pumping against a closed valve, which is, not smart, and then open it up slowly until we found a pressure that would keep the methane in solution until we were able to measure the amount of water coming out. Because with a pump test, you're trying to measure the volume of water or the rate to determine how that affects the aquifer. And so it was a real problem, because when we had the valve opened up all the way, it's just spurting and spitting the entire time because all that methane's coming out of solution. And the way to solve that is you have to add a tank. And so the water with the air in it, or the methane in it, would go into a tank, or maybe a tank in your basement, where you could then vent that, and it takes the air off, or the methane off, and then you have a small pump that would put pressure on the system beyond that, on the other side of that tank, where you could pull water through it that's all water to fill up your pressure tank. And that's, we see that too. Sometimes you'll have and it's not necessarily because of methane, because of other things that need to be vented that come out of solution whenever you take the pressure off. So it's not a cheap fix, but it's certainly something that can be done. And if it is methane, you drill a new well, you're still going to have the problem because it's in the aquifer down below you, not in the piping system or anything like that. So how do I eliminate the sulfur rot and egg smell? Well, this is one of those questions that we get all the time. And if you look back at most of our old webinars, which I said this at the bottom, you can find the same question, or maybe even not this exact same answer, but very close. It's hydrogen sulfide, and it's due to natural reactions in the bedrock. We have areas in Illinois where the bedrock itself has sulfur in it, and that water just smells. It feels kind of slimy. I have a brother-in-law that farms in part of Illinois that has that. I hate to take a shower at his house because of it. The water, you never feel clean. It just never seems to. And that's just the way it is. That's the groundwater they have, and they're used to it. But it could also be sulfate-reducing bacteria, which take the sulfate in the water and use it for food, and then they let off the hydrogen sulfide gas as a byproduct. And most of the time, it is sulfate-reducing bacteria, or it could even be combined then again with iron bacteria, which I mentioned before. And the way to do that is kill them with chlorination. And again, it also oxidizes. I said here, it oxidizes the gas present that would eliminate the odor, and that's true. But it can also, because it's an oxidant and it reacts with metal, what I say at the bottom, it can precipitate iron and manganese and other things, lead, if it's in your bedrock. And so it can release some of that stuff. And so you need to not only have a filter to take out the solids if you're going to use chlorination, but you also need to test your water to make sure it hasn't released any metals that are still in solution, like lead, that would be something you don't want to drink. So again, it may take several times. Sometimes if it's related to iron bacteria, that layered slime you can't get rid of, and you end up needing continuous chlorination. So you can't clean your well per se, but you can treat the water before you drink it. And that's just that's the way Mother Nature is, and that's not a good a helpful answer or one you want to hear necessarily, but that's the way it is. Okay, so where to sample and why? And this means where to sample your house. There are a couple questions about, should I sample at my treatment device or whatever. I'm going to show you an example, because what our lab does, and again, we're groundwater scientists, so we're trying to understand the source water, the actual groundwater aquifer water, if you will. And so what we try to do is get well owners to sample twice. Once at an inside tap, where they're like their kitchen tap, which is their drinking water. It's been through their pipes, it's been through any kind of treatment or softener or filter. And then one at an outside spigot or hydrant that's close to the well that's before any of that. And that's so that we ask them to run that for 20 minutes And then the water they're collecting is coming straight from the groundwater. It's really only been in the pipes for less than a minute, right? It's coming straight from the well. The pump's already kicked on. And that gives us a representative sample of the well water, the natural groundwater, which can be much different than the water that's at your kitchen tap because of treatment, your piping, if it sits overnight and it's leaching, all those things. And it's important to know both, in my opinion. It gives you a better idea of where your problem is if you have one. Because if it's not in the outside sample, but it is in the inside sample, maybe, whatever's going on with, if you have a filter or a softener, or, it could be a lot of things, or it's your pipes. And so I'm gonna throw you 3 examples. This gentleman took a sample at the outside, an outside spigot, and I want to, just a couple things I want to point out. The sodium is 25.9. The pH is 8.02 on the right. The turbidity and color are really high because it's natural groundwater, hasn't been through anything to clean it up like a filter, which he has. And the hardness is 351 down on the bottom right, okay? So then he ran it through a filter and a softener, and obviously he's using softener, sodium salt for a softener, because now his sodium went up to 198. But a lot of things now are less than the detection limit, which is what the minus less than arrows are. And the hardness is down to 0.68, so his softener is certainly doing its job. It went from 350 to 0.68. That's awesome, right? The pH is a little higher, 0.81, but not terrible. And so I guess that's the main things I want to point out there. But then he'd also added an arsenic RO unit, an RO unit to remove arsenic under his kitchen sink, and it's just for one tap on his kitchen tap. And so, RO removes a lot of things. It's not distillation to remove everything, but it's close. And so this is what the RO unit did to that water that's already been through the softener and filter. Almost everything is less than detection limit. There's no odor. The hardness is less than the detection of 0.18. Sodium's even down to 6.24 from 198. And the only thing that really wasn't changed is boron, and that's one of the things that it doesn't really work with. But look at the pH. It went down to 6.23. Now, it's at the unit that's right at the tap, so it's not like it's sitting in pipes where it's going to leach metals. But if you, a few people choose to buy whole house arsenic RO units, which is really expensive and not necessary in most cases, almost every case. But if they're doing that, now they've lowered the pH, and 6.23 isn't that low, but if you're in a different aquifer that's already got a pH of the natural water that's maybe at 7, you take all the buffering out, it may lower that even further. You've caused another problem for yourself that you may not realize. And so, it's good to sample in all those places is the bottom line. And that certainly costs more. But at least if you really want to understand your system, this guy was really smart in my opinion, because he also, I'm not going to show it here, but he also, right before his softener was ready to regenerate, he took a sample right before and then right after. And right before it regenerated, it wasn't taking out all the stuff it was supposed to. The manganese and stuff was calcium and everything else was not really low, but right after it was doing its job. And so he knew that told him the softener was working well. And so it's, there's a lot of things you can learn by taking samples, even that aren't related to your health, but just about how your system works, about what's different, where the issues might be. More knowledge is always better. Okay, farm field issues. How does living next to a farm field impact water quality in your well? Do all wells near farm fields have high concentrations of nitrate? And I just realized what time it is, you guys. I'm sorry, this is going long. There are a lot of questions, though, and I tried to answer a number of them. It's certainly possible it could affect your well. Anything at the surface could affect your well, but it's certainly not a certainty. It goes back to the issues we brought up. Is your well sealed at the surface? Where's the water source for your well? Is it shallow or deep? All those things matter. And so it's based on your well and how your well's sealed. Because, there's literally millions of wells that are near farm fields, and they're not all contaminated. Matter of fact, most of them aren't. It's the old ones, the ones that are shallow, poorly constructed. Those are the ones that are vulnerable. And so that's why you need to understand those things. Radon. How can I determine if there's radon in my water? Is radon, I'm not a radon expert, and certainly my boss knows more about it, and I've leaned on him some. But I found this on EPA's webpage, so it is mainly an inhalation issue. And that's why it's when you sell a home, it has to be tested and all those things. But on EPA's website, and this is actually, I believe this page has been retired by EPA, so it's on their archive, but it is available if you Google it. And so that's what I did. They estimate that there's about 168 cases of cancer deaths per year, and that's over the whole country related to radon. 90% of those, or 89%, are caused by breathing radon, and 11%, which would be about 20 people, get stomach cancer from consuming it in water. So it's a very rare occurrence that your water would be an issue, but it's also an avoidable occurrence to you as a well owner. All you have to do is test one time, and you'll find out if it's in there. And so that's really a comfort factor for you as a well owner. It's a tricky process to collect a radon sample because it'll volatilize. I think you have to collect it with an upside down bottle, and I don't have all the rules. I know we can get that information if someone's interested, but a lab should be able to give that to you as well that can test for radon. And so, yeah, here I put at the bottom, if you just Google radon in drinking water, it should be the first or second link from EPA's page. Aggressive water. So aggressive means corrosive pretty much, but they've started using that term because there's other ways water can be aggressive that doesn't necessarily cause, quote, corrosion in the strictest sense. So a lot of folks now are talking about aggressive water. It matters because if it is aggressive, it means it can leach material from pipes or pumps or equipment it's in contact with. So that's why if you have lead pipes or copper pipes with lead solder, and your water sits in your pipes overnight, if your water is aggressive, it's probably leached some of that copper and lead into the water, and then you're going to drink it, right? And so sometimes you're told, let the water run for 5 minutes first thing in the morning, and that may solve the issue, and that sometimes works and it sometimes may not. Virginia Tech's done some work that shows in their situation, because there's so much, their water has such a low pH, it can be a problem even an hour after the water's been running because it's actually in the well, and that's not normal. That's just that particular aquifer. So what you should do, though, is get a water analysis done that includes alkalinity, chloride, sulfate, and pH. Those things are how you measure how corrosive or aggressive water is. And Walt provided this. Its pH should be measured when the sample's collected because it can change when you're bringing samples back to the lab. And so you need to find out about that. You might want to have the lab do the sample for you. And then those things are used in a number of indexes. He listed the Larson-Scold index. There's like 7 of these. Some are meant to determine corrosivity. Some are meant to determine scale buildup, which is on the opposite side. If it's not corrosive, if it's neutral, that's perfect. Then you don't have scale buildup and you don't have corrosion in your pipes. But if it's not corrosive, it's on the other side leaning, it can build scale up in pipes, which that's a common problem too. And so these indexes were developed to take the chemistry and determine where they fit on those scales. But in general, if your chlorides are high and sulfate are high, or your alkalinity and pH are low, then you're going to have corrosive water. And that's what you need to know in order to determine whether you're going to have a problem or not, if you need to rectify that. And you can, increase the pH of your water. There's ways to increase, make it more alkaline, if you will, with treatment. Should well tests be for pesticides? Should wells be tested for pesticides, and so how often? Well, it goes back to the farm field question, but for one, there's many types of pesticides, and to actually test them correctly for all those things is a huge expense. I mean, literally. And so you wouldn't really do that unless you really had a real suspicion, or there was a reason why you believed it was contaminated. Because as I said before about farm fields, if it's properly constructed and sealed and it's not getting us water from the water table, then it probably isn't an issue. And the way it's the old wells, it's shallowly poorly constructed, and really sampling for nitrate and coliform bacteria should tell you if your well's susceptible and vulnerable. Because if it has nitrate or coliform, that means there's a shallow source, or your well's not properly constructed and it's coming from the surface. And then you would be more concerned about having pesticides in your well. And so that's the approach I would take if it were my money. Just to, you should, nitrate and coliform sampling, again, is fairly cheap, simple. A lot of labs do it, and it's a good peace of mind type of thing to do. Are there water tests I can do on my own? Well, many of these tests aren't really that accurate or give a lot of false positives and negatives. We don't really recommend them. But for a few things, and I already mentioned pH before, because of those industries and how accurate tests need to be, like for fish and aquariums, a few of the basic parameters that you can buy those kits at an aquarium shop or a pool shop are accurate enough and would be a good thing to do. On the other side of that, those tests are usually part of the equation for testing. Like if you're going to test for a suite of metals, they might include pH, alkalinity, and some of those things with it at no additional cost anyway. Or on the flip side of that, if you ask how much it would cost to do these metals tests, well, what about if I don't get pH and chloride? It may be the same cost because it really doesn't add. That's some of the same devices, treatment, or analytical equipment that are doing some of those things would be used for other things anyway. And so, if you're going to use one of those, though, I would get a full analysis done at a commercial lab, honestly, that's certified. And if you're going to use one of those kits, these are the things that I want to point out. Be sure you understand the units and how they relate to the EPA health standards, the results it gives you. Again, it goes back to the ppb versus ppm thing. And also be careful about miswording leading. A lot of that stuff isn't that accurate or isn't that good. If it says pesticides on it, I guarantee you there's no one over-the-counter kit that tests for all pesticides in any accuracy at all. It may test for a few of the common ones and just tell you whether it's a positive or negative hit. It's not going to give you a number. And if it says EPA, I don't believe there are any home kits that EPA would endorse. And so you need to be wary of what they're saying there. It may be misleading. Finding a good driller, there was a number of questions about drilling wells, and so I think this is about the last one, I hope. Just like for any other major purchase or repair, do your homework. You may need them in the future. It's likely to be a long-term relationship, and there really is a lot to consider. So I'd ask neighbors and friends with wells or others. The county health department are like, we don't recommend drillers. We tell you to look at the Illinois section of the Drillers Association, and they've got a list of drillers that are members. That's one thing you can do. Be sure they have a drilling license. If you're in Pennsylvania, Alaska, again, I would make sure they're certified through NGWA, a voluntary program, because otherwise you have, having a Pennsylvania driller's license doesn't mean they're qualified, based on my interpretation of what's required to get a license there. And if you're from PA and want to discuss that, I'd be glad to talk about it. Also, again, NGWA has a contractor lookup on their website for the whole country, and you can find it tells you whether they've got any of those certifications voluntarily, and also if they're members. That's all who's listed. But it's a good surrogate for to weed some folks out if there's a number in your area. I'd ask to see an example contract, and you should have a contract. You need to make sure they're bonded and all those things as well. And I would, and this is just my opinion. Some drillers just drill. Somebody else comes in and puts the pump in and does all the plumbing and the pressure tank and all that stuff for a new home. I would find one that does it all, because then you have one person you have to deal with. And there certainly have been cases where one may say that, no, this was caused by the well, and no, this is caused by the way the pump was installed. And it may save you some headaches if you're dealing with the same person for both. So yeah, and I'd ask lots of questions. Do they file their logs with the state? Do you get a copy of the log? Make sure that's in your contract. Because I have so many well owners that say, well, the contractor didn't give me the log, and now I can't get them to give me one. Because a drilling log is proprietary in a way, because it's the driller's way of knowing how to drill in that area. The geology is fairly similar over a small area. So if your neighbor wants a well from the same contractor that you had, he might ask you the name of your contractor, and then the driller's already got a log that knows how far he's going to have to drill, what aquifer he's likely to put the well in, how much water it pumped, all those things. And so in most states, those are required to be given to the state, and most drillers do what they're supposed to. In Illinois, we rarely have a problem with drillers who don't file their logs. And they won't tell you probably if they don't, but you can also look online, and if you can't find the logs by that driller, ask them why. But it's also ask if they know the geology in the area. You know, if they don't know anything about geology, they just may, you know, somebody may be telling them in their office or whatever, but you want someone who understands what's going on. So, and that's just a few of the things, honestly. If you take our class, there's a lot more information in lesson 7 about that because, you know, it's a big purchase. And when you get done, you want to have someone that you have confidence in and that you know is on the up and up business-wise. And if there's a problem, has insurance, all those things need to go into that decision. So if you're planning a new home, this is about whether you're planning a new well or a home, but if you're planning a new home with a well, then the most important things are to buy a home with a well, is to sample it and have the well inspected and try to learn as much about the well as you can. You should be able to find a log, find the driller who installed it, ask the well owner what they have, if they have any information about where the pump is, if they've had any work done, do they have those documents? Ask all that stuff and find out in advance. And for people, you know, I've had realtors say, or people say, well, my realtor said if we don't bid on this house today, we're going to lose it. And I understand there's real estate markets like that. Then what I tell those folks is, then you need to be ready to potentially put in $1,000 or more into treatment if your well has some kind of contaminant and it wasn't identified. Because in most of the country, you don't need to do any of those things. In Illinois, it's not the state that requires you to take a water sample. A lot of times it's a lending institution or Sallie Mae or Fannie Mae, because they want to make sure that they're investing in a property that's got the right property value. And so they want a test done to make sure the water's potable, because that could really cause a problem if the people decide they can't live there and then they can't sell the house. So all that's important. And as far as drilling a new well, I went over some of the things in the last thing, but really take our class. If you know you're going to build a home and you've got some time, take our class first and go through it and go in informed, and so you know what's going on. And so here's quickly about our webinars. So when you go to our website, up at the top is webinars events. If you click on that, it's going to tell you the upcoming webinars. There's also a drop down that I didn't show here because I couldn't figure out a way to take a screenshot with my cursor and hold the drop down down. But if you go to the drop down and go on past webinars, it'll show you a list. But if you just click on this, it takes you to this page, shows you today's webinar and all the ones we're going to do in the next few months. If you scroll down this page, it shows you all the past ones. Not all of them, but some of the more recent ones. And I think there's like 10 or 12 still in here, which we probably don't need that many. But you can go to each of these and click on it and get to a recording. You can, like the one from last June is just below this. It's the same material in the first that I covered early on, not recently here. But you can go down to the questions and they're going to be different questions than the ones I answered today, or some of them will be. So you can learn a lot from all of these webinars just by going to the questions at the end. And if you haven't taken the How to Find Information and Help or Funding and Financing, you should do those as well. So that's what I have today. I appreciate for those who've stuck on. I do want to mention that our program is growing and we do a lot of health work. So we're looking to hire 1 or 2 EHPs to come work with our program. And it's not only the private well class, but we're going to start a water quality applied research program here. And it would be an opportunity to applied research related to groundwater, surface water, maybe even a little wastewater on the health side of things. And so if you're interested in that at all, and you're an LHP or an EHP or work in that environmental health field, you can email me. That's my email address. And we have a number of questions. I'm going to go to those. I know. Let me just get out of this and pull it over and make it full screen and make it larger, and we will go through these questions. I should have made it larger beforehand. I apologize. Okay, so I'm just going to go through these, and then we'll be at the end. How do we get information on a private well from your archives? Well, if you're in Illinois, just call us. You can call me. You can email us or email me. And we have I manage our records room, and we have 2 or 3 staff, 2 staff, who they answer requests from well owners and everybody else in the state every day. And so you can get on our website for the Illinois State Water Survey, or if you and you can get to us that way too in the groundwater section. So what's considered a deep well? And I assume a north suburban suburb of Illinois, of Chicago. Up there you have the St. Pete sandstone that's 1,800 feet deep, and like out, I believe in Kane County, there's a number of private wells that are actually down in that unit, but there's also several obviously shallower than that. And so it's really relative to your area. When I say a shallow well, I mean one that's using water from the water table, typically, or that is influenced by the surface, where a deep well is usually a buried aquifer that is not directly influenced by the surface, or water has to travel a long distance in the aquifer before it actually gets to where your well is. And by the, like the St. Pete, for instance, a deep sandstone, it actually outcrops over by Rockford, 50 miles away, but the geology is on an incline, or a decline, if you will. And so that same unit, you can draw a line from Rockford at the surface to Chicago at 1,800 feet, and you'll hit the same aquifer all the way through. It's connected. And so it's not flat, it's at an angle. And so it really matters. And, I would say for where you're at, it's really a well that's not using water that's from a shallow aquifer or the water table that's influenced by the surface. Okay. Should I consider not using grub control insecticides and weed control fertilizers on my lawn for fear they will contaminate my well? Again, it's the same issue. I think we've answered this in that if your well is properly sealed and it's a deep well, there's no risk of water running down along the casing. And the well casing's elevated so that if there were a really heavy rainstorm event and there was some ponding, water wouldn't be overtopping your well. It shouldn't be an issue, and that's really what you need to consider. And again, it's different. I get this question a lot. It really depends on where you're at. There's in New York, there's wells that are 600 feet deep, but before the rules were passed in the early 2000s, you didn't have to have 50 feet of casing. So you have a 600-foot bedrock well that's got 12 feet of casing. After that, it's all open hole. It's just the rock. So if there are any cracks in the rock near the surface, then that well still is susceptible to surface contamination, because there's a hole from 12 feet down to 600 that's just an open, like a small vertical cave that water can seep in from any of the cracks and fissures in the rock. And so it's really relative to the aquifer, the geology, and your well. Unregulated private wells are understudied potential sources of community-acquired. Wait a second here. Unregulated private wells are understudied potential sources of community-acquired Legionnaire's disease. I disagree with that. I think I've seen this article already, and the real issue, specifically, even the EPA talks about Legionella, and I guess I have not seen this article. I saw an article that was on EPA's webpage because I was looking something up about Legionella, and maybe this could occur, but it's rarely, if ever. It's based on hot water heaters and larger buildings where the water sits, and I don't know enough about it to really comment on it, but I don't believe saying that they're an understudied potential source of community-acquired Legionnaire's disease. That's more alarming than it is fact, in that it's kind of like the radon thing. Certainly drinking radon laced water could kill you and give you stomach cancer, but it happens so infrequently, and I think certainly, I guess it's a true statement, it could be understudied if in fact it's actually more than we've ever believed. But I don't have anything to discuss on Legionella in private wells, because I've always understood that it's more of a building and larger system problem. All the Legionnaire's outbreaks that have ever occurred have all been, retirement homes, hotels, places that basically manage their own water supply, but they're not following the guidelines for the Safe Drinking Water Act, because some of that's changed. There's building rules now, and that's because of Legionella. So I'd be glad if you would. I'd be grateful if you would email me, and I can get a copy of that article. I can certainly look it up, and we can go from there. How often do you recommend getting home water tested? Well, I think we've covered that annually for coliform and nitrate, and then probably this was put on here before we got there in the talk. Are there any additives that should be placed in the well? No, not that I know of that should be placed directly in the well. If you're going to treat your water, you should do it when it gets in your house. That's the bottom line. So even if the water is low pH or whatever, you'd want to raise the pH. What communities do is they add phosphate to raise the pH of the water, and that's how they combat corrosive water in their systems. And so in theory, then when it gets to a home that has lead pipes, the water is not corrosive anymore. And that's what you would do as well. Do you have any information for homesteads that share a well between properties? We do. We've talked about it. We have a short video on it. I recommend you look at that first. The bottom line is you need to have a contract with everybody involved, or it needs to be in the deed of the property you purchased. Because if the well's not on your property and that property sells, the new homeowner who owns the well, because it's on his property, may decide he doesn't want to play nice with everybody. And all of a sudden you have to put in your own well. And so you need to have an agreement in place among the well owners, kind of like an HOA would, that says you're sharing the well and you're going to share expenses. And the other thing to do would be to have a fund that you both put into, because eventually pumps fail or problems happen, or you find out it's got arsenic naturally occurring and you both want to add treatment. It's just a good idea. We have a swale, tiny stream that runs against our well. Is there anything that we should keep an eye out for? Well, that's a bad idea. Your well shouldn't be at a stream, at least where it's contacting it. It can erode things away and stuff like that. Feel free to email us at info@privatewellclass.org and send me a picture. But you should keep, recommendation for a well would be to be a certain distance away from any water body. And so if it actually flows regularly, your well shouldn't be that close. And there are cases where you can get a variance because there's no water anywhere but down along the stream, because there's a sand that's left from when the stream used to be a lot larger. But those are few and far between. If your well's in place, then you should just sample and you try to protect the well from that the best you can, so that it's not actually running up against your well. Okay. Can we send water samples to you? I'm not fully trusting of companies. Oh, I'm sorry, let me get back up here. That do, there's a lot of good labs out there, and if you, and some may not be as good at explaining the results, but again, and as far as selling other work, the same thing. Just say, no, I want a water sample. But if you use a certified lab, they certainly can. They've went through a lot of expense and effort to become certified so that they are qualified under the eye of the EPA and the State Primacy Agency. And so you can use them. I mean, they, the one question to ask is sometimes there's more than one method for determining a constituent in water, like for arsenic. Make sure they're using the EPA certified method and not some cheaper method that they can use that may not be as accurate because it's not a compliance sample. And that's the one caveat I would put there. Our lab, I believe, still only does samples in Illinois, but I can ask. That's going to change eventually. They are working on certification, and that should happen this fall. And then we're probably going to open it up more to places around the country when we can be certified. But they're in the midst of trying to get certified, and that's a job in itself. Yeah, I mean, contact us. We can talk about it if you want. I'm not sure what they charge, to be honest, or any of those things. So, because usually it's for Illinois folks. And if you're in Illinois, it's a good lab to use because it's subsidized by the state, and it's only about $65, I believe, to get a sample done, where if you're out of state, it'd probably be over $200 to do the full suite of inorganics and metals and things. Okay, we have consistent low levels of nitrates when we perform our annual water testing. Is that typical, or anything above 0 an issue? No, I'd say anything above probably 3 or 4 is an issue. It is ubiquitous in the environment, and there's going to be a little. The standard is 10 tested as nitrogen, and that's the health standard. And again, there is some recent research that suggests nitrate could be a problem related to some sorts of cancers. But when you look at all the research, it's very, it's on both sides. Some shows nothing, some shows it could be. And, what EPA regulates nitrates for is for babies and pregnant women because it causes blue baby syndrome. The nitrate turns to nitrite, and in your blood, it bonds with where the oxygen is supposed to bond, and it basically suffocates you. And that's why there's I can't think of the name, it's a really long word, but the disease that it's called when babies drink water with high nitrate is called blue baby syndrome. And it's because they're literally turning blue because they don't have enough oxygen. If you have a youngster under a year of age or so, and it might be 6 months, but a year of age, just to be safe, maybe use different water for them if you have high arsenic. And it's up to you, a comfort level, whether you want to drink it as an adult if it's higher than 10. A lot of people do, but we certainly wouldn't give that advice. That's a personal decision. Are water softeners and reverse osmosis systems helpful in improving water quality and removing contaminants in radon? I don't know about the radon. Water softeners really are replacing ions, so that it takes the hardness out of the water, calcium and magnesium, with sodium and maybe just sodium, I believe. But RO systems remove a lot of things, and they are used as a treatment to improve water quality. Some people don't like the taste of water that's been through an RO unit because it's taken everything out that may cause any kind of taste. And like, for instance, my dad always swore our well water was the best water in the world because it tasted so good and it doesn't have any of those chemicals in it that cities put in it, like chlorine. So some people actually add minerals back into their water after their RO unit to improve the taste. But there's a long list of different types of treatment devices besides RO for taking care of water quality issues, and you need to use one that's specific for the contaminant you're trying to get rid of. Okay. So what are some causes of coliform bacteria in a well? Well, coliform bacteria comes from our bodies, and animal bodies. So it's livestock, our septic systems, animals. That's where coliform comes from. And so when you have a feedlot or livestock nearby, or you have a septic system, or your wells, like the well I showed you that's in the pasture where the cows have been rubbing on the posts, that's going to have coliform bacteria in it from the cows. And so it's natural occurring. We have it in our bodies today. That's the way it is. But it's used as an indicator because itself, coliform isn't a health risk. It's E. coli. That's the health risk. Are there State Department people like in Illinois who can come out and inspect wells? Actually, a lot of the county or state health departments just don't have the staff to go out and inspect wells. But through our program with EPA, we developed a tool it's an assessment tool, and I didn't talk about it today. It's a different presentation, where someone from RCAP can come out and inspect your well and take a look and tell you what might be vulnerable, what might you need to do better, you need to fix your well cap, you really shouldn't store this here. This area has a lot of wells that are in karst, all those sorts of things. And if you are interested in having an assessment done, I can get you to the person with the regional RCAP office who would do that. And their home office is in Ohio, but they have staff in every state. And I work with them, not every day, but close to every day. And so, they would find a time when someone was going to be nearby and come out and could do a well assessment. And they give it back and they take it back to the office. They fill out all the information, and based on what they find at your well, they make a list of recommendations to give you, like, your well should really not be in this feedlot or whatever, and recommend that you test and all those things. And then they send you a copy, and it's for you to have. And I tell people that have an assessment done, keep it with all your other well information, because it's really useful to know at this date and time, here's what I knew about my well. You know, things change, like, you know, farmsteads change. They get rid of their overground storage, oil tanks or gas tanks, all those sorts of things. And it's good to have that information in hand, even for a contractor if you have a well problem, to be able to look at that. I have a rust hole in the side of the wellhead pipe, and the cap is not securely fastened with bolts. How can this be repaired without large expense? You know, I don't. It's going to be an expense if you're going to put a you know, a well cap that's proper. Those are not cheap, and you'd have to replace that section of pipe. So sometimes a contractor can put a sleeve in at the top, so that now it's instead of a 6-inch well, it's a 5.5-inch well, because you put a 1/4-inch sleeve pipe in, that sort of thing. But you need to talk to a contractor to do that kind of repair. You may find someone who would help you understand how to do it yourself, but that's probably more than, I certainly wouldn't try to do that myself. Okay, my backyard adjoins to my neighbor's backyard. I have public sewage and they have a septic tank. How far should my well be from their septic system? I think if you have 5 mature trees in your yard, there's really not a lot you're can do, but to monitor your tank and make sure that water's still flowing out. If roots get into your septic field and start clogging that up, then eventually water won't be able to run out of your septic tank, and it's going to come out of the top, and you're going to get a really green spongy spot in your yard first, or it could back up into your home. And at that point, maybe you do need to take them out, because you're going to have to replace your septic field. They make, for people on city sewer, there's we always call it a pig. It's a thing that goes in and grinds up the roots in your septic line, or not septic line, your sewer line. Because if you have a tree in your yard and it's got in, because what are roots going to do? They're going to look for water, right? They're going to go right to your septic field because it's got a continual source of water. Depending on your state, there'll be a setback, and that's for any new construction. If it's already in place, unless you can prove that whoever put in the septic tank did it negligently based on the rules then, it's up to you to deal with your septic system. We could have somebody, I could certainly ask RCAP to contact you, depending on what state you're in, if you're interested in having someone look at it. But there should be a state guideline, and there's in almost every state, on what the setback should be between a well and a septic, even on adjoining properties. And if they're in a case where there's small properties and they're too close to each other, a lot of times they'll have to get a variance, and then that's when you see the more advanced treatment for septic, instead of just a septic field that's got things that take out some of the bad stuff and all that. So, okay. How do I find a local lab for arsenic uranium testing? Hopefully I mentioned that already and talked about, you can look on, if you're in Illinois, for instance, you can look on the State Primacy Agency's website, which is IEPA. In Minnesota, that's the Department of Public Health. It's different in every state. But if you go to US EPA and say certified lab, US EPA certified labs, it'll give you a page that shows a map. You click on the state you're in on that map, it'll take you to the page on your state primacy agency's website. And what a primacy agency is the agency in your state that's in charge of regulating all the communities and the water they drink. They're the ones who are responsible for making sure that every community is putting out water that meets all those standards. And so they also ensure that the labs that are listed there are the ones that can do that testing. So, and if you have problems with that, you can contact us. We can help you find that web page for your state. What's the best way to find your well if you don't know where it is? Oh my Lord. I haven't had this question in a while, but I have had it before. Um, the only, there's a line coming in your house if you have a basement or crawl space for your well. The only thing you can do is use like a metal detector or dig up that line and follow it. And it's the same, we have that issue more with septic systems. And that's what a septic installer will tell you is find out where the line comes out of your house, or goes out of your house for your septic. And then you can follow that. And generally there's not too many elbows or turns. It's a lot of times it's straight to the tank because you don't even get clogged. And so that would be my advice, is to follow the line out of your house and see if you can't find, hopefully a metal detector would work, but you might have to dig it up. And, a lot of times those are 3 or 4 feet, so that's no small thing. And, call a couple contractors, drilling contractors. They may have an idea, something else that you can do. You don't have to use them. They may not tell you unless you hire them, but, it's worth asking. Okay, that went way long, and I appreciate everyone who's still on. Yeah, thanks for your time.